Good evening, folks. Welcome back to another Monday night live stream. How's everybody doing? We have got a nice little. We've had a lively chat in here tonight before the streams even started. Nice to see lots of familiar faces. Nice to see some new names too. I'll very quickly dive through and say hello to a few folks that's been chatting. We've got Super Pumpkin Man. We've got Dirk Ignatezek. I'll get out. Sorry, Dirk, for butchering that so early in the stream. We've got Busey was in as well, Different Gear TV. We've got Paul McElroy, Peter Cooman, Tony Howell, Matthew Wilkinson, Ortega. Paul McElroy was said, Arnold DeGans, nice to see all of you. We have Steve Evans and Steve Evans, both of the Evans twins. We've got Blizzards as well. We've got Mr. Trainer Guy 1. We have also got Simon Parfit. We've got Mark Wright. Who else have we got here? I'll go down my list. We've also got Glenn Griffin. Hello, Glenn Griffin. We've got Iron as well. We've got Anabolic. We've got Scott Longworth. We have Six in the Head. Good evening, Palms. Hope you're well, mate. Got Krabby Vision. Hello, Al. How are you? Got Peter Stockdale. Says, evening all. Been enjoying these streams. Thank you very much, Peter. It's been nice to have you in them. We've got Tony Booth Leiden as well. Good evening, Tony. We've got Yoakum as well. We've got John Estel saying, evening all, 25 likes is a third of a dance. It is, mate. It is a third of a dance. For those who don't know, we had a chat in the Patreon today about how many likes it would take before the stream started, before I would get a song and a dance at the start. We've also got Christian. Good evening, Christian, mate. How are you doing? Fumble's in as well. Good evening, Fumble. Mark Berracloth, good evening to you, sir. Chris Warden, we've got Derek Hodge, James Zorm, good evening to you lot. Red Rose Wargaming, good evening, Anna, how are you? If you haven't checked out Red Rose Wargaming's latest video, it's about basically happy birthday to Warcry. It's 1 year old. If you're a Warcry fan, definitely worth a watch. We've got Simon Road Dave as well, good evening, mate. Busey saying, pop those beers open. I'm on the water tonight, mate. It's a bit of a shame, really, isn't it? And David Delaney's in as well, saying, shh, everyone, don't tell the boss I'm watching. Oh, your secret's safe with me, mate. Bobby Clark, good evening. Jim Street said it's mid-afternoon stream here in the States. Good afternoon to you, Jim. How are you doing, mate? We've got Dave in as well. Hello. It's got Tim Cafferty. Good evening to you too, mate. Andrew Pierce, good evening. Dirk says, just pronounce it as it's written. It's got loads of, hard to pronounce letters together. A T and a Z together is quite a difficult pronunciation. Ignatzek. There you go. I assume that's what it is, mate. Kieran's in as well. Says Outside Dice podcast. He says, hi all. Basically, competitive gaming only kills competitive gaming. Nothing kills your game. I don't think people really understand what I'm going to talk about tonight, because there's been a lot of talk about competitive players and about tournaments. That's not really the point of tonight's stream. I'll come on to the exact point of it, but I I appreciate you all coming in, because it kind of gives me a chance to talk through this in a bit of detail. It's something I'm really kind of quite interested in, and it's a bit more to do with the companies themselves, about the game rules, about the state of the industry, and less to do with kind of are people dicks when they play in tournaments, that kind of stuff. James Brazen, good evening, mate. How are you? Debs with Hobby Studio, good evening, Deb. Hello. Dave says, are there any celebs around Newcastle that play Warhammer, such as Jimmy Neal or Paul Gascoigne? I don't think either of them live around Newcastle anymore now, mate. But I don't. None that I'm aware of, mate. Anyway, none that I'm aware of. There's more chance of Paul Gascoigne sort of going fishing, I think. Scott's saying he's on the rum tonight, building up his 10 Deathwatch veterans. They might not look like that by the end of the rum night, mate. Arnold DeGans has just donated as well. Thank you very much, mate. He says spot free. Krabby Vision says, who's the dude in the thumbnail? Looks like a Batman villain. The dude in the thumbnail, mate, is a character called Casket from Guild Ball, and I'll come on to why that's relevant in a second. Peter Nicholas, good evening to you, mate, too. And Christian saying, I think it's a Malifaux character. No, it's from Guild Ball, mate. So tonight's stream, and the title I've said, is competitive player killing your game. And I think it's quite. I'm gonna get straight into the stream. I'm also gonna try something different tonight, folks. As well, is I'm going to try and record this with a clean screen when I do this, because I'm potentially thinking I've done loads of prep, proper organised prep tonight, printed off notes and all sorts. I'm going to try and potentially clip out the bit where I kind of do my speech and maybe have it as a little kind of a quick video for folks that don't really come in and watch the streams, to kind of give them a little kind of glimpse of what the streams are about. So I'm going to try that tonight, which is why I've kind of cleared the screen while I do this, and then I can clip this out and pop it back into another video later. So tonight's topic is competitive player killing your game? And there's a reason why this has kind of cropped up into my mind, and I'm going to flick across to the other screen here to show you why. So if I can find the right button, that's the one. So recently, last week, Guild Ball creators Steamforged had this announcement, and it said basically announcing the end of Guild Ball. And I'm not going to go in and read the details. I'll put a link into the description if you want to go and read it, or if you type in Guild Ball ending, this will come up in the in your list of stuff. So it basically goes through kind of what's happening. They're essentially saying that after 6 years, basically the game is now coming to an end. They're no longer going to produce or sell sort of miniatures for it. They're not going to support the tournament scene anymore. Doesn't mean the game is dead. If the community wants to kind of keep playing it, the community will keep playing it, much the way Blood Bowl did. But they are stopping support of the game. Now, there's some stuff in here that's kind of sort of rippled up and kind of like upset the Guild Ball community a little bit, I would say. And essentially, what this says is that there's a little bit of information from the creators and stuff. And this is some of the stuff I want to talk about. And this is some of the stuff that's both, it's both sort of got the topic for tonight going. It's also the reason that kind of why I've gone into this a little bit deeper now. So if I scroll down a bit, there's a bit where basically it starts to say here, and it says, we set out to make the cleanest, most balanced miniatures game you could play at the time, and we achieved this hands down, flat out nailed it. I wouldn't disagree that they created a very competitive, balanced game. And it says here that Guild Ball was a competitive player's dream. It rewarded player skill and experience with a very flat probability curve to minimise variance. This is something I'm going to come back to later, so remember that term about flat probability curve and minimising variance. The competitive scene grew and grew. It says, but this ended up hurting the lifespan of the game. And that is really the topic that I want to talk about tonight. Can a competitive game actually kill a game off before its time, or kind of kill a game off earlier than a game that's potentially not competitive? I'm killing the game is probably provocative. That's what I'm trying to do. I want you to come and click and watch this, but it's ending the game as far as Steamforged are concerned, and this is it's relevant for other games too. What they go on to say is that Guild Ball became the type of game where you win your first game, your demo, and then lose the next 100 games. When matched against a lesser skilled or inexperienced opponent, a better player would simply win the vast majority of games. It says here now is that the competitive scene began to dominate the design space for wilder, more fun elements and began to shrink. Now this is something I'm going to talk about as well. And it says new minis were either overpowered or trashed here the second they were announced. Why take a new model when XYZ already fills that role? The style of gameplay changed to a low-risk, ultra-conservative player where the ball was often deliberately sidelined. Now in a game that's based around football, this is kind of taking the game in a direction that they never really imagined it to be. And they say that this wasn't the Guild Ball we envisaged. We always knew that this would happen eventually. From the beginning, we said Guild Ball had a shelf life, and if we wanted to avoid the game collapsing under its own weight through skew creep and shrinking design space. With a game that new players found tough to get into and a gameplay style that wasn't very football-y, the community began to dwindle. So this is kind of something else I'm going to touch on as well. If I can come further down, a few topics I've kind of highlighted. Season 5 was always intended to be the end of the current story arc. Season 5 is what we're in at the moment. And with a polished set of rules and well-balanced minis, it was the perfect moment for Guild Ball to come to an end. They also go on to say here as well, games that thrive on competitive play require players to be in the same location at the same time. With stores on lockdown and events being cancelled, the future of Guild Ball became harder and harder to envisage in the current climate. And then also, what else was I wanted to talk on? They did a field test basically, and it got them some interesting results. And it says bringing in new players would mean changing the game too much for existing players to remain happy. Now that's quite kind of telling and stuff. And it's one of the let me just get the right screen. It's one of the points I want to talk on. So that's the reason behind it. It's less to do with the actual sort of tournaments themselves, less to do with the players, and it's more to do with if you design a competitive game, what is the effect on that, and what does it do? So I want to start by kind of defining what do I mean by competitive play and competitive players. Now I think that players essentially fall into three different groups. Kind of like sort of give me some artistic license here. I think there's a casual player. These are the player that kind of they play at home. They maybe play in stores or clubs. They prefer the story and the narrative experience of the game, and they want to have fun over winning. Winning isn't their kind of main target when they play a game. They want to just have a fun experience. You then have competitive players. Competitive players are kind of like the list builders, the math hammer type players. They choose the rules over the models. So if a rule is really, really kind of strong on a particular model, it doesn't really matter what that model looks like. They'll still take that model because they like the rule. If a model looks great, but the rules aren't great, it won't see the table kind of thing. They enjoy going to tournaments and they enjoy sort of competing. They shift their armies and they shift their options that they choose as the meta shifts. They're constantly kind of moving along that kind of lines. They tend to play to win. That seems to be the most important part of the game for them. And even when they play casual games at a local club or at a store, they're essentially really just getting tournament practice in. That's what you tend to find with a more competitive player. And then basically, the third type is people who are just somewhere in the middle of those two sections. They might still attend events or tournaments, but it's usually just to play more games and maybe have a few beers on the night time, socialise, meet people they don't see very often. They might still enjoy the list building side of things, but they'll tend to include the models they like. They'll tend to go rule of cool over the most kind of like optimal list, if you like. And they tend to stay quite close to the meta just to understand what's going on, and so that they can still build a list that is essentially still kind of it's still sort of playable in a tournament. They're not going to basically kind of lose turn one in the first event, if you like. So competitive play for me is really, it's where the aim is to win. That's what they're going for. It's where the wider hobby takes a bit of a backseat, and winning is the most important part. So that's my definition. I'm not saying that is the definition. That's where I'm coming from for what I'm going to talk about tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of competitive play and a bit of a history about gaming as well, just to set the scene. So if we go back to the 80s and 90s, Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k were probably the two main games. There wasn't really a lot else. I mean, let's exclude historical stuff for the moment. It's a bit of a different topic, but within the kind of the mainstream, if you like, and I say that in inverted commas, tabletop gaming, Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k were kind of like the big ones. They were the go-to games, and we did have competitive events. Warhammer Fantasy had a huge big tournament scene. But they weren't run by Games Workshop so much. They were run by the community. Games Workshop did have their own tournaments at Warhammer World, but they were very much played by the rules in the book, and they were played with with having fun as the intention generally. Tournaments that were run by the community tended to have what you call compacts, and compacts are basically, they are adjusted rules for the game, or for the lists or the options you can take to try and balance out the game and make it more balanced for competitive play. And this is something that basically that we don't really tend to see so much these days, but we did back then. They were created by the community themselves. GW back then, very vocally, were a miniatures company first, and that basically any rules that they had were really a vehicle to sell miniatures. They were less about the rules and more about the actual miniatures themselves. GW got a little bit complacent at this time as well, and they became kind of comfortable being the biggest fish in the pond, basically. So they kind of just relaxed a little bit. They were quite happy just to sell what they're selling and be that big company, really. We then fast forward to the 2000s, and other independent companies are starting to spring up around now, and they're trying to base their games around the competitive side of things. They see that there is there's a bit of a market there that Games Workshop are not really kind of spending too much time on. They can also see that they can't really compete with Games Workshop on that hobby casual side of things. It's like trying to climb a mountain, basically. So they intentionally go after this kind of really tight rule set, competitive market. The rules are designed to be really tight. They're designed to be balanced, and the community don't need to kind of create these compacts for them to make the tournaments sort of more balanced, if you like. So these games are games like War Machine, they're games like Infinity, games like Malifaux, games like X-Wing. And these were competitive by design. It's almost that the rules were designed first, and then the minis were almost secondary to it. These companies, they released official player packs. So War Machine very famously had their kind of steamroller pack that they updated every year. And these packs basically are specific tournament rules. They had timings in them, they had scenarios in them, and explained how to run an official War Machine, in this instant, tournament with prize support, etc. War Machine itself, for example, even had that famous like page 5 rule which said, so play like you've got a pair, or put down the metal and go and find something made of plastic. A very genuine dig at Games Workshop and their plastic miniatures, and it was really that kind of almost like that play like you've got a pair was the aggressive nature of this game is competitive. If you don't like it, don't play it kind of thing. So then over a number of years, we've got the growth of miniature gaming, and that basically now we see miniature gaming grow, and companies begin to use Kickstarter as a way to launch games and get lots of options out to players quite quickly. Competitive games only work when there are lots of options. If you've only got 2 factions, it's very difficult, or if you've only got 2 factions and very limited numbers of models, it's very difficult to get a competitive scene up, because essentially you end up with one list that basically is the kind of top tier. So the competitive scene all basically go after that kind of stuff. Games like Guild Ball came up from this. Guild Ball from Steamforge we've just been talking about, and essentially that was basically designed to be a competitive game. The 2 creators, Rich Locksman and Matt Hart, come from playing in that War Machine community. They loved War Machine, they loved tournament player, and they wanted to create their own game, but had that tournament scene in mind. Around this time, probably somewhere around kind of 2015-ish, Games Workshop began to kind of wake up and they begin to see what's happening in the kind of like in the market. They start bringing back some of their older titles like Blood Bowl, and they bring back Necromunda. They create some new games like Silver Tower, and they start to reclaim some of that kind of casual market that maybe some people who were just used to playing their bigger scale army games like 40k and fantasy were starting to drift away from a little bit. And it's at this point, like by this point, games like War Machine, Malifaux, and X-Wing, they've reached a point where the games are becoming quite bloated now. They've had a few sort of adjustments to rules. They've had like points updates. They've got a lot of miniatures that are out there. And the competitive scenes dominated the way these games basically, the way they're developed, the way they're expanded, and the way that they're sold. The communities for these games are full of veteran players who've been playing for years, and the design space basically becomes very small because the designers for these competitive games, they want to keep the rules tight and they want to keep the rules balanced, but they're constantly trying to tinker it, to overcome the meta, to change the way the game's being played if it's not really what their intention was. They have to keep bringing in more miniatures to sell because they don't make money tinkering with the rules for free. It's all about selling miniatures that keep them afloat, if you like. And that's the background to this. So why do I say it's competitive play killing games? Now, there's one major difference between 40k and AOS and probably all the other games. And people will be saying, oh, well, 40k is competitive and that doesn't look like it's going to die anytime soon. The biggest difference is GW sell miniatures and miniatures kits. They sell the entire hobby experience, and then they sell rules to basically use these miniatures. The other companies basically sell games and then have to sell miniatures to make the money to keep these things going. They focus on the rules. When a game's designed to be finely balanced, what tends to happen is that the randomness of the game is reduced as far as possible. And this is when I come back, if I can kind of see that note, what was the term I said before. It was about the very flat probability curve. The more you reduce the randomness in a game, the more it comes down to player skill, player knowledge, player experience. And whilst that might be really good for a balanced sort of tournament game, it doesn't make it very fun. actually becomes quite sort of dull for casual players. So if you play these games, if you're at like a pick up games at a store or something like that, the player with the most experience will generally crush the newer player. These games tend to be full of those kind of gotcha moments. If you think about War Machine as an example, this cast a kill type thing, it really punishes any not optimal player sort of positioning. So if you're a new player and you're not expecting these models to do certain things, you'll be punished instantly and punished quite hard. Dice rolls become a lot less kind of important in these games, and that these moments of randomness, these are the moments of randomness that we talk about. These are the bits we remember when we play these games, and those moments almost disappear. Like if you think about exploding 8s in certain games, they introduce a huge randomness. However, those are the moments you talk about. Those ones where you're down to your last model and you roll an 8 and then an 8 and then an 8 and then an 8 and you take out their kind of leader and it wins you the game. That's random. That really kind of implies that it's not a balanced game when that happens. How can my little model take out your huge big kind of leader model? But those are the moments you talk about. Those are the kind of the exciting moments that you tell your friends about down the club the next week, if you like. But they kind of disappear from the game. On the flip side, too much randomness also hurts the game. Nobody wants to have a game where basically it doesn't matter how good you are at a game or what decisions you make. The rolls of too many dice basically kind of counteracts that. So there is a fine balance to be had there. There've been examples in games like X-Wing in its first iteration where actually the list builds were so basically fine-tuned, the dice were almost irrelevant. Like it didn't matter if you rolled to hit or not, because there was stuff on your cards, there was stuff in your list build that guaranteed certain things would happen, and lists were built around this. And Steamforged have said themselves in that kind of explanation that I read out there about how in Guild Ball the ball had become a smaller part of the playing experience, and that the game became quite cagey amongst like sort of player fears about like a mistake being exploited. So after 10 years, like a model line becomes quite bloated, and the rules are constantly changing to accommodate these balance issues. It's harder to design new additions. There's probably already something in the range that kind of does the job better anyway. So you essentially basically, people aren't buying for the aesthetics and for the cool backstories. They're only buying these stuff in competitive games when the model does something special. And what generally happens is if that model does something special, everybody cries how overpowered it is, and it gets nerfed into obscurity. And if it doesn't come out and doesn't give you anything benefit, it doesn't sell anything. And that's where these games get into a really kind of dangerous territory at this point. Like power creep is a really strong sales model. If everything you bring out is slightly stronger than everything before it, people will buy it. It's good for sales. It's not good for a balanced competitive game. It becomes difficult for new players to get into the games because essentially there's a huge wide range. I mean, I think Guild Ball had like sort of 250 models available at the point when they've basically pulled the plug on it. And as a new player, it's quite difficult to know where to get started. The community did say that there were some bigger issues around kind of stock issues and some quality issues. I don't really know enough about that to kind of go into it and to confirm or deny it kind of thing. I know there were some quality issues around resins and stuff, but if new players are put off because they start playing the game and they basically just get their backsides kicked on every game they play, and there are too much choice and everybody they play against basically has a huge kind of range of stuff to choose from, that's quite off-putting for a new player. It's also at the point when retailers just don't know what to stock anymore. Their local player base have pretty much got everything that they want. New players are not coming in. And this is it means that basically if new players aren't entering it and existing players already have everything they want, sales are pretty much diminishing. This is probably where Warhammer Fantasy got to. So at this point, a game has really got two options. It can you can relaunch it, you can kind of rejig the rules, come up with a second edition, you can tweak the whole thing and relaunch it again and try to appeal to a new player base without upsetting your existing players. And then, and essentially, Steamforged have referred to this, and when they said they did kind of some of their field tests and stuff, there's been some complaints about that as well, but let's just take it on face value of what they've written. There was some feedback came that if the game was changed dramatically to allow an easier entry point for new players. Veteran players wouldn't be happy with it. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit there, but that's basically what their document says. The other thing you can do is basically you can just call it a day, like Steamforge has just done. The game's reached its end of its lifespan, if you like, and it's no longer financially viable. They mentioned something about they released some captains recently just to kind of see how big the game was at this point, and I think that kind of gave them an idea of just what those sales were like, if you like. Now, one thing I would say is that the backlash that people are giving Steamforged about this announcement is they feel, and I can understand why they feel it is, they feel Steamforged are blaming the competitive player base for killing the game. Now, the way I've read it and the research I've done and the more I've looked into this, and I've looked at it from lots of different angles, I don't necessarily think they are blaming the players. That Steamforged games have been kind of honest about this, I think, and that basically it's not intended. I don't think it's intended the way people are necessarily taking it. I think it's because it's the initial design concept of the game was always going to lead to this point. If you base it around a competitive rule set, but you need to sell minis to keep the business kind of sustainable, it only really has a finite lifespan before it basically just becomes bloated and you need to either reboot it or you need to basically get rid of it. If you look at games like War Machine, like Malifaux, like Infinity and X-Wing, some of those have had a 2nd edition, some of those have had a 3rd edition. Infinity is currently coming up to its 4th edition at the moment. And look at how the popularity of some of them games, War Machine especially, how it's kind of diminished over a period of time, how sort of 3rd edition was never quite as good as 3rd edition was never quite as good as 2nd edition. It's starting to tail off a little bit, and essentially you've got Privateer Press are looking to bring in Warcaster now because they know that War Machine's on the downward trend. They need the new game coming in to start to try and pick up and carry on the mantle again and get people buying minis again. The miniature companies also don't tend to make models redundant in the way that Magic the Gathering will say, right, all kind of season 1 stuff is now out. We're only playing with seasons 2 and 3. I know that's not called that for Magic, but you get the point I'm making. Miniature companies tend not to do that. I think Warhammer Underworlds is probably the only exception I can think of where they've almost they've tried to keep it fresh by constantly bringing new stuff out and making the older stuff like not compatible any longer for competitive play. The older a game gets, essentially, the less obvious the entry points for new players can become, and the more that basically the veterans of those games, they get a bit bored, basically. There's nothing really new coming out. I've played it quite intensely for quite some time. Let's have a look and see what else is out there. So we've got no new players coming in. The veterans are leaving. The game is headed in one direction. And there are quite a lot of games out there that have essentially reached the end of their lifespan, really. There's a lot of companies out there they're pretty much keeping the games alive in name only. They might talk about them on a blog once in a blue moon. They might release the odd model here and there or something like that. But they're not actively really supporting those games anymore. I'm not going to call them companies out, but you know exactly the kind of the games I'm talking about. Essentially, those games have also reached that same point. They're not really dragging in new players. They're not really catering to their existing market anymore. But people enjoy playing them. And so basically they kind of keep them alive in the spirit of it, really, rather than actually from a business point of view. And purely from a business point of view, these companies are here to make money. That's their priority. And by launching a new game which appeals to a wider audience, that company is going to be making more money. It's going to be sort of more beneficial for the long term than maybe making 1 or 2 models for a game that already has a limited market now at the end of maybe like a 5, 6, 7 year lifespan. And what I think is GW is the exception in this. I think that they managed to walk this line because basically probably about 80% of their player base are probably casual players. Even not even the player base. Probably 80% of their business is just casual market. It's people who buy the kits. It's people who like to buy paint the stuff. More like hobbyists than gamers necessarily. They're starting to embrace that kind of more competitive end of the market, but their core business is still just selling models to people. They've created these amazing worlds around their games that even when you're not playing the game, you can read the book, you can listen to the audio books, you can basically You can build new model kits. You can like sort of paint stuff up. There's a whole sort of hobby around Games Workshop stuff that isn't necessarily around competitive gaming. Take X-Wing as an example. We've just come through like kind of lockdown stuff now. X-Wing has really suffered by the fact the whole game is based around competitive play. It's based around people getting together and playing the game. There's not a lot of hobby. You can repaint your miniatures, but they come pre-painted, and a lot of people pick the game up because they don't have to paint it. So that's really suffered during this kind of COVID time. Games Workshop are booming. They're doing absolutely fantastic because people have just decided to buy models and paint the armies up that maybe they didn't have time to do, or let's start a new army, I've got time on my hands. People are not necessarily doing that with these more competitive games. So basically all miniatures games go through this. Board games tend not to do it. A company will basically release the standard game. They might release an expansion for it. But then that's pretty much it. That's the end of it. The game's there. You've bought it. Play it as much as you want. We'll move on and we'll create a new game now. And that doesn't really happen with miniatures games. Miniature gamers expect a game to be supported and constantly basically sort of fed into and have stuff to buy for many, many years to come. And I think when the product ends, basically, they feel robbed, basically. They've invested time and money into these games, and players feel robbed that they can no longer buy stuff for a game that they enjoy, even though they still have all of that stuff and that game will still exist. And I can see why people feel that way. But at this point, basically, I'm going to kind of round this up here for what this short video is, and this will be going up live now, so you'll be able to see this one separately. But I'm going to flick back across to the chat, so if you are interested and you want to talk about this, let me know down in the comments at the end of the video, or come across to the live stream and check out what everybody else has been talking about. So that was a bit longer than I thought it was going to take. I'm going to dive in now, and I'm going to have a look at some of these comments. I am bound to miss lots of comments now, but if anybody's been shouting me out, I'm sure I'll see these comments. Arnold's not being savaged. His name's there. He's not going to be missing for too long. Super Pumpkin Man is saying their game balance is so hard. It certainly is, mate, yeah. Dave's saying that they made Guild Ball too much like chess for balance, meaning Grandmasters trounced beginners. I think all competitive games like that, and this is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. These games are designed to be mega competitive, mega balanced. War Machine was exactly the same. When you were new at War Machine, you moved one model, and your opponent, with their kind of like the matrix going on, could see, well, if I do this, I'm going to nip through there and I'm going to kill the caster. I can ignore everything else that's on the table. Malifaux did similar things to a lesser extent because it was more scenario based. But Guild Ball very, very definitely was like that. X-Wing, 100%. It's a negative play experience to play a mega balanced competitive game against somebody on a completely different experience level to it. If you're just playing at home with family or with friends and you're all similar experience, these games are still fantastic games. But if you're just getting pick-up games down a local club or something like that, or you're going to tournaments to just try and get a few more games in, unless you have a rough idea what you're doing, you're going to have a relatively negative play experience. And the longer these games go on, the older these games get, the worse that becomes, and that's exactly where Guild Ball ended up. I actually quite admire Steamforged for being quite honest about this. They could have just basically left this to kind of fade into the background like a lot of other games. They've spoke up, they've taken a lot of flack for it. I'm not really on either side about it. I wasn't part of the Guild Ball community to know exactly the background of everything that's gone on. I'm not really a huge sort of Steamforged fan, and I play all of their games kind of things. I'm somewhere in the middle, and I'm an observer looking into this from the outside, and I think that way I can kind of have maybe a more balanced opinion on the whole thing, I think. Hey, good morning, VJ. How are you doing, mate? Krabby saying, isn't 40k the largest competitive minigame out there? That's kind of what I touched on in the live stream, in the chat there, mate. I think it is a game which people play competitively as opposed to a game that has been designed to be competitive. And I think that's quite a distinction, and it's quite a definite thing. If you think about the way Games Workshop have basically, if you think about 9th edition now, they've brought down point sizes, they've brought down table sizes, they've tried to make it more accessible to new players. They know that painting up a big force is a bit of it's a tall order for a lot of people, so they're breaking it and making it more accessible. Every rulebook has matched play in there, but they also have narrative play in there. They also have open play in there. if the rule books only came with that kind of tournament pack, I would say yes, you're right. It's the biggest competitive game out there. I think it's the biggest game out there that happens to be played competitively, and because it's popular, a lot of people play it competitively. But I think it's probably 20% of the 40k audience, if you like. The vast majority of people are people like me, people like you, who basically pick up the models because you love them. You want to play a few games here and there as well, but it's a hobby to you. You enjoy the reading the books. You enjoy listening to the audio books. You enjoy watching a kind of a live stream of something. You enjoy painting the models. I think 80% of their business is those kind of people, and that tournament players might shape the points lists, if you like, but again, that's why they've got power levels and sort of more granular points. They're specifically not excluding anybody. I think competitive games like X-Wing, like Guild Ball, do exclude people who just want to play a more fun game. Nobody plays a game of Guild Ball and goes, "Oh, let's just play a story." I've never heard of a narrative Guild Ball event, if you like. Lord Maiden, hello to you. Saying sorry he's late. Don't worry about that, mate. Krabby saying I believe Magic the Gathering is super competitive. Yeah, I completely agree, mate. And I think, have you ever tried to get into Magic the Gathering? Again, if you want to go to kind of Friday Night Magic stuff, I know shops try to do kind of things to introduce new players, but if you go to a Magic the Gathering event, it's hard. It's hard work, mate. VG saying Blitzball human team seems appropriate. I'm not sure what that was about, mate. Phil Tolhurst says, hi, all games are competitive. And he says, you need to balance the ultra competitive with the more casual. Not all games are competitive, mate. But Burrows and Badgers is not a competitive game. It actually says in the rule book, if you're looking for a competitive tournament game, this is not it. The Walking Dead All Out War originally was a narrative-driven story game. The community started to build competitive sort of rules, and they started to build their own compacts for it. I think you can be competitive at any game. You can want to win. You can play it like a competitive game, but not all games are designed with competitive play in mind, and that's something I think is really important. I'm not accusing players who play competitive games of killing these games off. I'm saying that if you design a competitive game, by its nature, it has a lifespan, and that competitive play is what is killing these games. I say killing. Those games will always be there. You can always play them. But they get to a point where they either need a huge rejig, like X-Wing to X-Wing 2.0, and they need to redo the whole game again because it basically falls under its own weight, and there's too much stuff out there to try and balance it. Or what you do is you start doing like what Shadespire's done, Warhammer Underworlds. You get rid of the first season, and you're only trying to balance 2 seasons worth of stuff, so that when season 4 comes along, season 2 falls off. Magic does this. When I used to play Star Wars Destiny, the card and dice game, Star Wars Destiny did this as well. That way you limit the amount of stuff you need to balance. If you try to balance stuff that has been released over a 6-year period, you're gonna have a difficult time on your hands. Von Wood, good evening to you, mate. How are you doing? Crowley saying it's up to the community to give new players an avenue in and maintain the flesh of the community. I think if you've got a competitive game, mate, that's easier said than done. Guild Ball had Kick-Off, a starter set that basically was a good route in, and it was good value. For whatever reason, they ran out of stock of it. Maybe they decided not to restock it because they knew deep down this was going to be coming or something. But as soon you can buy that starter set, and if you try to go and play in a wider community, if you go to an event, if you go to a store and you're playing against people who absolutely crush you every time you play, because that's the way the game's designed, there isn't a narrative aspect to it, that will put you off. You'll put that starter set back on the shelf and you'll go and play something else. Andrew Pierce says season 5 is coming out in September. We're in season 4. Yes, sorry, that's what I meant. Season 5 was planned to be the last one. I think essentially what they were going to do was they had a few things that they wanted to release for Season 5, and then they were going to end it anyway. And then what they've said is basically the feedback that they got from the field test, combined with the fact that COVID has come and has put their production schedule into basically kind of into a problem, that they just decided to pull the plug on it now. Crabby saying, imagine just having the Premier League with no other footballing division. People would go and look for another sport, obviously. I don't think they would, mate. Why would people go? If people enjoyed watching Premier League football and it was their team that was in that league, why would they go? Why would they go and look elsewhere? Glenn saying, I wonder what the field research involved. I can't remember the details of it, mate, but it was asking questions about what if we changed this rule? What do you think about this change? What about if we did this? And a lot of the feedback from the community was you were asking us to play test stuff during a lockdown when we couldn't get games in. So I do appreciate that. They did put some stuff on as a Tabletop, so people could play and stuff. But the community says that the field test was carried out in a really uncontrolled way. But what the Steamforged have said is the results they got back were quite telling. And essentially what they're saying is the community, it said that if the game changes significantly to make it an easier entry point, most people would move on and play something else. Phil saying, we discussed X-Wing in the same light. X-Wing opted to go to X-Wing 2 to redesign the game. Yeah, exactly, mate. Paulie P. Hello, Paulie P. He says, the killing the ball statement was rubbish. Nobody did that as having the ball was too valuable. I'm not up on it, mate. I'm literally reading what they said. If in some sort of metas, if in some areas it got to a point where the ball was almost sidelined and it was more about just taking out players, I'm sure they must have had that feedback from somewhere. I can't imagine that they would just kind of make that up, but it might not be like that in your area. Andrew said they did their field test in lockdown. I've just mentioned that one, mate. Pomsey's saying he struggle to understand this. For a player, a game is whatever you make it. And from a company point of view, if it's making money, let's keep selling. Okay, so to unpack that bit, the game is, any game can be fun depending upon who you play with. Okay, if you're just playing with your mate and you're having a couple of beers and a pizza, you can have fun no matter how competitive that game is. As soon as you widen out your player base, and that's what makes games grow, that's why these companies have these event packs, that's why they have organised play. As soon as you try and grow that out and more people are playing against people that they might not be kind of sort of, they're not mates with necessarily, the guys down the club, guys down the local store, the girls that basically kind of come to events or whatever it is, that's when a game gets out of hand. That's when you get a disparity between the people that play 5 days a week and the people that play 5 times a year. That's when you get that disparity. And from what you're saying there about if a game's making money, let it sell, I agree. What they're saying is it wasn't making money anymore because through whatever reasons, whether that's lack of stock, which is what the player base is saying, or what they're saying is that basically everybody had stuff, so they weren't buying any new stuff and new players weren't coming in. They decided to call it a day, really. Mike says Masons, butchers and blacksmiths likes killing the ball. There you go, mate. Samuel Davis saying, I feel like games like this have a shelf life similar to really competitive video games. They can't stay around forever. The more casual, friendly games do. That's it. That's exactly the point. That's the point I'm trying to make. If you take something like Call of Duty, yes, they could, in theory, basically never release a new version of it. They could never release a new version because online play are generally very similar. People like playing it. But what happens is very quickly from launch day is the really good players are really, really good. The people that are new coming into it basically get their butts handed to them, and so they just stop playing it. I'm one of those people that just doesn't even bother playing it because I know as soon as I go on, I can't stay alive long enough to know what I'm doing wrong and to learn to get better. That's one of the things that happens in these miniatures games. That's why they release a new game every year. It gets people spending money again. It gets people excited about it. It gets the new players back in who probably didn't get involved because of those disparity. It's exactly that. If it's a less competitive game, you can enter that at any point you like if you want. Super Pumpkin Man says, I never play the meta for my armies. I just play what I like, and that's where you fit in. That's why maybe you're not one of those mega competitive players. It doesn't mean you don't enjoy the game. It's just you play what you enjoy. Phil Toller says X-Wing have also got two solutions, keeping the meta interesting. Yeah, they've got something new out now, haven't they? Basically called Hyperspace, I think it is. Bit of chat there about Blacksmith was football, Butchers was killing game with the odd goal. Mike's saying, yeah, it depends on on your meta. Definitely. Krabby says, we're back to the conclusion. It's your hobby. Do it how you like it. No, that's not the case here, mate. This is not about hobby. This is about gaming. This is different from hobbying. You can do your hobby however you like it. I agree. And this is not even about the players themselves. This is about how you design a game. And if you design a game to be really, really finely balanced and mega competitive, it has a shelf life. Because basically it cannot continue to get wider and wider and wider and stay sort of balanced like that. It's impossible. That's why companies wipe out the first wave when they get to wave 2 and 3, and they wipe out the second wave when they get to wave 3 and 4. Because you to keep it finely and tightly balanced, you need a small kind of sort of amount of stuff to balance. 40k isn't perfectly balanced. People whinge and complain about it all the time, about Taus this or Ultramarines that or whatever it is, or Orcs are underpowered. They complain about it all the time. You'll never get it perfectly balanced when you have the amount of stuff that 40k has. But people love the game enough to overlook some of these kind of minor things, and more so because it's a small proportion of a huge kind of community that play at that top level that it even matters to, really. Pomsy saying, yeah, basically you wouldn't give up on something that's selling. I don't think it was selling, mate. That's the whole point. They've said themselves that they launched this kind of these captains, and that gave them an idea of how big the community was that was still buying stuff. Flying Mammal, hello, how are you doing? Dirk says, so is Dreadball kind of an undead game? It is competitive and it's not really that alive, but still not really dead. Dreadball's one of the games I'm talking about, mate. Mantic haven't released anything for it in forever, really, to be completely honest. And it lives within the community in the same way Blood Bowl lived within its community of the NAF, basically kept it alive when Games Workshop stopped supporting it. It doesn't. This is what I mean. It doesn't mean a game is dead. It doesn't mean Guild Ball is dead now. If the community want to keep this game alive and they want to keep playing it, they will do. The game itself isn't dead, but I think games from a design point of view have a lifespan. Blood Bowl just stopped being developed, didn't it? The community basically fine-tuned a few things and maybe ironed out a few rules over time, but essentially the game that Games Workshop picked up again recently in 2016, I think it was essentially the same game that they basically let go many years before that. Dreadball falls into that. I mean, it's the difference with Dreadball is that basically Mantic still sell the miniatures for it, but they're not exactly pushing it. It's not like it's not like a thriving kind of game that is massively supported. They have the odd kind of tournament at the head office for it, but when was the last time anything new came out for it? Kirill says, good evening to the most non-toxic community. Good evening, Kirill. How are you doing, mate? Super Punk Man saying, yeah, haven't played X-Wing since 2nd edition came out, just didn't care about having to use an app to play a tabletop game. And again, that is based around being mega competitive. They can adjust the points cost very quickly when they see something that they don't like. And as a casual player, if every time you come to play that, if you haven't played the game for 2 months and you come to have a game and all of the points have changed, so the list that used to kind of match up against your mate's list doesn't match up anymore, you go, well, what am I doing? Like, I don't know what we do now. Essentially, you have to just play the old points if you can still access them, and you'll still have a fun game. And that's my point. It's when you go down to the local club and you get a pickup game and you go, oh my list doesn't work anymore because the points have changed since the last time I played. You change them too often to appease a competitive market, and you will alienate casual players who can't keep up with the changes. Where are we up to here? Phil saying it's a way for game makers to control meta. That's exactly what I've just been talking about there. Busey saying, so Guild Ball and Dread Ball are the same thing. Not really, mate. No, I mean, they're different games. Guild Ball is a miniatures game, really, which happens to be around sport. I would say Dread Ball is more of a board game. It's played on hex movement. There's no measuring tools involved. Guild Ball has been, you now can't offer a Guild Ball. Steamforge aren't any longer going to be selling models from September, I think it is. Mantic will still sell models. Basically, they have a pile of them that they haven't killed it because they've still got stuff. They keep having sales to sell stuff off. They probably replenish some of that stuff because it doesn't cost a lot to put that stuff back. But in that respect, yeah, similar, but not similar in gameplay at all. Phil saying, but it works really well. It's what really Hope GW. I think you're talking about the apps and stuff like that, weren't you? Mike says they screwed up production, going from metal to plastic to resin back to plastic. Yeah, and I appreciate that was a problem, but I don't think that was necessarily the nail in the coffin for the game. I think they got a lot of grief about it and they tried to put it right, but I don't think that was it didn't kill the game completely. Glenn says, Andy, you have a lot of followers. While it seems like we are all very normie people in the hobby, surely there are some people here who are competitive gamers. I'm sure they are, mate. I don't know if me potentially, I don't think I'm potentially a very competitive gamer, so I probably don't necessarily attract a mega competitive crowd. I don't make videos about kind of the best lists to take. I don't make videos about how to play the game. So maybe my crowd are more the casual hobbyist sort of magpie gamers who flit around, really. Steve says Marvel Crisis Protocol is a prime example of a curated competitive game. Is it competitive? I've heard it's not. I've not played it, mate, to comment on it, but I've heard it's more casual, if I'm honest. Guildball Gamer, hello mate, how you doing? He says, dang, Andy said Guildball was designed for competitive play. Don't tell Steamforged Games that. They said it themselves, mate. If you read that document, they set out to say, Guildball truly was a competitive player's dream. We set out to make the cleanest, most balanced miniatures game you could play at that time. They designed it. That's their words, mate, not mine. Scott says, I play a game for fun. If I don't enjoy it, I just don't play it. Yeah, me too, mate. Jabra75 says, play a competitive kill team and the TO's changing rules as written has completely ruined the game for me. There you go, mate. There's another example of a game that's probably not finely balanced for competitive play, so the community take it upon themselves to bring out comp packs to try and make it more balanced. People did exactly the same thing with Walking Dead. The Walking Dead is a narrative storytelling game, but there's an area of the community that wanted to play that competitively, so they created some competitive sort of rules, if you like, some balances and some checks for the game themselves. All games, that people will do that because they'll play what they want to play. There's nothing at all wrong with that. The difference is when the game itself is designed to be balanced from day one, it has a shelf life. It basically has a point where people just get burned out on it because it becomes unwieldy. Pomsy says, can we just say arseholes are killing the games, or am I missing the point? I think you're missing the point, mate. It's nothing to do with the players. This isn't about the players. This is about the effect of designing a game to be competitive. It's nothing to do with the players themselves. Phil says, it's interesting you talk about randomness because I've seen good players wish random damage in 40k was removed. That's exactly the point, mate. They don't like the fact that not everything in the game is outside of their control. They would rather if you take out dice rolls completely, and I'm generalising here, but if you take out dice rolls completely and just say this model will always hit that model, this model will always defend against that model, at least it's predictable then. And then what you do is you don't put things into combat where you're going to lose. The thing is dice rolls is what makes it fun. Dice rolls is what gives the underdog a chance. That's what makes thematic games. I've just been playing God Tier over the last few days, just getting a few games in, getting ready for a review, and the dice rolls are so random. You can have a really, really powerful character in there, but if you get in and fluff all your dice rolls, it really changes your plan. It's a very strategic game. I can imagine it can be a very competitive game, but I think there's more randomness in that than there is in a lot of other competitive games. Jabba saying we have a great community and kill team, haven't run any arseholes. Yeah, again, mate, nothing to do with the player base. I am not criticising competitive players, so please don't misunderstand that I am talking about designing a competitive game. Jabba says any competitive player that goes and tables a casual player is just a dick. I don't agree, mate. Why should the competitive player not enjoy their game any more than the casual player? Those players probably just shouldn't play each other. That's the whole point. And I think that's the problem when it comes to these kind of games. If you get a casual game, something like Walking Dead, I'll say, because it was designed to be a narrative game. if you have a casual game, you will attract casual players. If you're playing like a narrative campaign, you will attract like-minded players. But if you play at a competitive level, you're going to get people who are just getting their foot in the door, and you're going to get people who want to win a tournament or want to win an event, or they want to play a really hard game because that's what they enjoy. I don't think it's the competitive player's fault. They just enjoy different parts of gaming. How they trash that person is a different debate, really. But just because they play to win doesn't instantly make them an arsehole. That's the point, really. Tony says, really did love Guild Ball up till about 6 months ago. Went to a tournament a lot. Brought many new people in the game. Sadly, I saw their decision coming when they went corporate. I can't be overly critical of them because I think Matt Hart and Rich Loxham created this game themselves. They will have a really kind of strong place in their heart for this game. They will be doing this through gritted teeth, I'm pretty sure. But with their business heads on, it probably just doesn't make financial sense anymore. And unfortunately, unless you run your business like a business and not like a hobby and not with your heart, you won't be in business very long otherwise. So I kind of get it. It's hard as a hobbyist and it's hard as a player to see these things happen. But it's more about how you deal with it rather than actually what you do, I think. As a company, I mean. Super Punk Man said, I once failed to kill a single orc boy with 30 shots and he survived this twice, so I named my friends Orc Dodger. That's what happens when you put a bit of randomness in. You take randomness out, those things don't happen. Phil says, one thing GW does do is have a shelf life for their editions. I don't think they do have a shelf life, mate. I think that is an intentional marketing strategy. They release an edition, they change all of the game up by constantly releasing new codexes, and then when they've gone through that whole cycle, they mix the game up again and release a new edition. It's not a shelf life as in the game's come to an end. It's basically like it's just there's nothing we can do anymore now. Or maybe it is there's nothing we can do anymore. There's nothing we can do to make more money maybe. Look at the Indomitors box set for an example of what happens when they release a new edition. Theirs is a money driven cycle of new edition every 3 years, new books all the way through that edition, new models through that edition, start again. I don't think it's necessarily them running out of energy for the game, if you like. Simon Davis saying, yeah, he loves the random element, makes the game more exciting, admittedly less competitive, but I'm more interested in that in the game. Me and you, mate. Yeah, me and you. Paulie P says, I loved Guild Ball precisely because of the competitive nature. I play Kill Team, Walking Dead, Blackswan Fortress for the narrative and casual fun. There's a place for both. There definitely is a place for both, mate. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to have a competitive game. What I'm saying is that competitive games have a shelf life. And Guild Ball has reached the end of its shelf life. Maybe it's happened kind of like maybe 5 months earlier, 6 months earlier than they intended. And maybe some of that's to do with COVID and it screwed up their production plans and all that kind of stuff. So they decided to just basically cut their losses and come out of it. However, it doesn't make it a bad game. It doesn't make the players bad people for playing a competitive game. Every game has its place. If those games didn't have a place, people wouldn't play them. Michael Burke, good evening, Michael. He says, I play games for fun, win or lose, I don't care as long as it was fun. Yep. And then you kind of fit into the casual gamer or somewhere in the middle, mate, rather than that mega competitive gamer. Dirk says, I think the difference between Guild Ball and Dread Ball is that Mantic doesn't care to kill off the game since they make their money with their other games. I think the difference is Steamforce didn't have to kill off Guild Ball, but it would be quite disingenuous to just then sit there and never give it any more models while there's a community kind of hanging, waiting for new stuff, and rather than piss them off over a longer period of time, maybe it is better to kind of cut the ties at this point. And they might take a lot of flack for it. But maybe the company's changing direction a bit. Maybe they're more board game focused these days. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Jabra says 8th edition, 3 years and a dozen books to carry to a game. Yeah, and that's why they refresh it every 3 years, mate. Mike says they were out of stock for a while in between seasons 3 and 4. I had heard that, mate, but I don't know the details. Phil says, I was a new player, turned off by Guild Ball, the community, and lack of miniatures when I try to get started. Yeah, the lack of miniatures probably doesn't help. But yeah, trying to get games, and if you can get a game and you basically just keep getting thumped into the ground, then that's going to be tough. Philton, I think Steam Forge shot themselves in the foot a few years before this happened. I don't know what you're referring to, mate, so I can't really comment on that one. Krabby says, can't we all just play a 40k narrative and get along? I think most people do, mate. I think most people do. And what you tend to find is a lot of the kind of gnashing of teeth and stuff when old Space Marines get two wounds. The casual gamer doesn't really care. Like, it's the tournament gamers who think, oh, I've just built this army, I've just bought all this stuff, and now it's changed again, and now I've got to buy something else because it's changed. I think that's the competitive end of stuff that really kind of creates this tension. Paulie says, I never felt unwelcome by the community, and I love learning more about the game when I lost to someone 12-4. I think when you're at the point when you're losing 12-4, mate, you know enough to score those 4 points. It's the people that are just getting started and they basically just don't even know what they're doing wrong. Unless you can get in with a group of people locally who want to learn and grow together, or you have an experienced player who enjoys teaching newer players to get them on board. Otherwise, it's a hard mountain to climb, and that's any game. I'm not having a go at Guild Ball about this. That is any game that does that. Any game that's competitive, I should say. Mike saying, I'd say God tier is very good. Yeah, my opinion so far, say it was good. Mike saying not one could get said captains. I don't know about that, mate. Like I say, I'm not in their community of stuff. I'm reading the document, and this is it's less about Guild Ball itself. It's more about the idea that this relates to any game, any competitive game. It's got a shelf life. Joachim saying, I haven't been a tabletop that long enough to think your topic really. I haven't been in tabletop gaming long enough. I think your topic really got me this time. Good work. Paulie says, the worry within the community was that Steamforged has fallen in love with hexes, and any change to Guild Ball was going to go down the God tier route. Again, I don't know about the details, mate. But if that's the case, maybe that's the reason why. Super Punker Man says, I was mad about my Tomb King getting removed. I left Warhammer Fantasy completely because of that. Yeah, and I think a lot of people did, mate. I don't think that's necessarily a thing. You should also have a Night Goblin army, but I was very upset about losing these mummies. Technically, you could still play the game. Like, loads of people still play 9th Age. But yeah, they basically they didn't transport them over into Age of Sigmar. Yeah. Jabber says GW is starting to put stuff into Legends. Yeah, I have heard that as well, mate. And it's unusual for companies to do that, but I can see why they're doing it now. There are some models probably that just are hard to balance, or are so as a main character, they're maybe meant to be so powerful that they just break the competitive side of things. Put them into Legends. Everybody can play them in their casual games. It makes no difference. But from a competitive side, and they're starting to focus more now on some of the competitive stuff to tighten that side of things up a little bit. Yeah, I can see why they're doing that. They're not saying you can't use them. They're saying you probably can't use them in Warhammer official events. Vorpal Bite, he said, I want a historical miniatures game in a big box. Missed this game in a big box. Could always try something like, what have they got? I don't know. I don't really know the historical stuff so much. Phil says Underworld Season 3 at Christmas, but it's a card game as much as a minis game. Season 4 at Christmas, mate, it will be. Underworld will be Season 4. You've got Shadespire, you've got Night Vault, and you've also got Beastgrave, which is already out. The 4th one probably will come at Christmas, unless COVID's shifted any dates of that. But yeah, I agree. I think it's a card game as well. I don't think it's a minis game. I think it's kind of... It's purely minis for positions, basically, that and it's a nice way to basically kind of build on the GW community, but it's a card game first and foremost. David Moffat says, here, Blackjack Arenas, another day at work. I'll catch the rerun. Catch you later, mate. Jabber saying OG Marines will be shelved. Doesn't seem to be at the minute, mate. They seem to be bringing them back. VG says Underworld cycles out cards, not minis and war bands. Yes, sorry, mate. It's the cards they cycle out from seasons. Yes, that's what I meant. I'll go down a little bit more. I'm just going to dive in because there's so much chat here. I'm way behind because of that bit chat. Phil Toller says, isn't God tier kind of reminds me kind of made to be competitive? Yeah, I'm sure it probably is, mate, as well. I'm sure they're trying to make God tier the kind of the successor to Guild Ball, and I think that was probably their plan long term. In the same way that Privateer Press are trying to make Warcaster the successor to War Machine. In the same way, other companies kind of sort of try to follow something with something else, if you like, because they need to sell minis. That's where they make money. Arnold says chess pieces selling was never a business plan. Yeah, but that's like saying Monopoly. Monopoly's not a business plan. Like it's a different industry. If you're just trying to sell a board game, then that's it. People don't want to buy extra bits for board games forever. They want to buy extra bits for miniatures games forever. People don't want expansions for chess. They don't want expansions for Monopoly. They don't want expansions for Ludo, if you like. It's a very different thing. You can't compare chess with like miniature gaming. Super Pumpkin Man says random is fun. That's why 4th and 5th edition orcs were hilarious. They're still kind of random now, mate, to be fair. Phil saying casual and competitive Magic players are a different breed. I think that casual and competitive players for most games are a different breed. Walter Black says, to be honest, 2 minutes of pre-game communication on the type of game you want to have would fix a lot. I don't disagree with that, mate. However, you might find that actually you might never get a game. Like it's like if you're a new player and you come to a store and you go, I'm brand new to Guild Ball, I just want to have I only want to have somebody to teach me how to play properly. You will get the odd person, but then that will wear out after a while. People won't keep wanting to give you that game. People are giving up their time. They want to play too. So if they want to play competitive games, they'll play with competitive players. And I think that happens naturally. It's just that the people who are just getting started have a negative play experience and it puts them off the game, I think. Andrew Fairbanks is saying, even Blackjack Arenas, I find Steamforged games Guild Ball Paradox interesting. Game dies a slow death, or they change the rules and piss off the competitives. Don't think about it as sort of annoying competitive players. That's not. It's annoying veterans of the game. I think majority of people who play this at kind of sort of event level or club level or something tend to be more competitive players. That's just the nature of the game. It's a competitive game. It attracts competitive players. So it's not the player's fault. What they're saying is if they change up the game to make it an easier entry point and give the game more life, it stops becoming the game that the veteran players who have spent a long time supporting that game, it stops becoming that game anymore. Look at how War Machine changed from War Machine Prime 2 to Prime 3. Look how Malifaux changed from version 1 to version 2 to version 3. These games change quite significantly and they end up alienating quite large portions of their community. Let's look at how Warhammer Fantasy turned into AOS as an extreme example. That's what happens. Games Workshop are big enough to kind of weather that storm. Most other companies are not. Johnson, if there are no dice rolls, I'd be stuck. My dice rolling is way better than my strategic thinking. Yeah, so is mine, and my dice rolling's awful, mate. Simon Davis says, totally agree, mate. My mate likes competitive games of 40k, but I like narrative, so we compromise. We can't always expect the competitive player to compromise, to be fair. Yeah, that's exactly it, mate. At the end of the day, if they're your mates, you have to kind of trade it. If he wants a hard game, he wants a hard game. If he puts a lot of effort in and he wants to kind of play, like, be tested, if you like, maybe the difference is he gives you 2,000 points and he has 1,000 points. Maybe that's a different way to give him the hard game he wants, and it gives you more options. There are other things you can do, but when you come to like small scale competitive skirmish game type stuff like Guild Ball, like X-Wing, maybe there's less you can do at that side. Funball says, as somebody who's been working on competitive environments for Blood Bowl for well over a decade, an important lesson is that different people have different opinions on what that should be. Yeah, I can imagine, mate. He says it's a really difficult tightrope to walk, balancing people's wishes, and that's the point where sometimes it's right. You can't please everybody all of the time, kind of thing. The problem is if you can only please some of the people some of the time, is that sum big enough to make any money from? Because at the end of the day, these are businesses, and if it's not big enough, then you call time on it, basically. Simon saying, I think randomness in games is essential for it to be fun and more realistic. War and sports have random moments that can sway the outcome, so this is essential for games to be realistic. I think sports in general try to get rid of the randomness as much as possible and try to be more even. But like if you think about Warcry as an example, some of the things that people hate about that game is that the missions, the objectives, the deployments, all that kind of stuff are really swingy. They're really kind of swingy. However, that can create some quite fun and thematic moments if you're just playing a game for a bit of fun. If you feel like you're up against it, like you can play into that. If you're in a tournament event and you think, before I've even rolled a dice, I've got no chance here, that's very different. Vopal Bite says, I want to win at Gen Con. You have to wait till Gen Con's back on then, mate, won't you? Scott says, I don't play in tournaments. I played an X-Wing tournament and loved it, but certain players took ridiculous lists and won every game. There's my point, mate. That's why it's about it. If you go to a tournament, expect to play against people who want to win. That's just how it is. It's not their fault. They might not be nice people. They might win in a bit of a dickish manner, but that's different. That's not what we're talking about. If you come to a tournament and you play against people who want to win, that's to be expected. What tends to happen is, and what I enjoy, if I go to a 2-day event, I know I might get my butt kicked first couple of games, but then generally I'm playing against people who have also lost 2 games. And eventually you settle into that kind of bottom of the list meta where you're playing against like-minded people who've come, they're either new to the game, they've come for a bit of fun, they're just trying out some daft lists that basically it's because they've got a nice theme to them. You find your place. But if you go to a tournament that's like 3 or 4 games in one day, you don't play enough games to get to that level where you're playing against like-minded people. You might just keep getting pummeled all day, and that's not fun. But you did go to a tournament. That you're going to expect that kind of stuff. Well Hung and Done says, I don't mean to flog a dead horse, but 40k's activation system is clumsy and deeply flawed and cripples it for players like me. I assume when you say players like you're a more competitive player, mate. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's balanced. I said earlier on in the live stream, 40k is not balanced. That's why people complain. 40k has a power creep to it. So new models come out and they have really sometimes quite broken rules until people get their head around them and GW FAQ them and bring the points down a little bit. It's not designed to be a balanced game. It's designed to be a fun game, and they're trying to balance it as much as possible without taking the fun out of the game, I think. And that's just basically how it is a little bit. VJ says, so the Thrust is a game that is designed to be competitive, has a shelf life. I'd love to hear a professional game designer like James Hewitt's opinion on that. Maybe revisit the topic with him as a guest or another pro game designer's thoughts. It's my thoughts. I definitely agree with that. If you listen, there was a recent podcast with Jamie Perkins. I think it was, is it Third Floor Games or something like that. I'll try and dig out a link for it somewhere. He was interviewed about this, and he has a similar opinion. He says they have a shelf life. He says that they become bloated. I would actually love to sit and have a conversation with him, because I think we agree on a lot of stuff. I think we think quite like-minded. I've come from an industry in the past where I designed new products for a living, and I know that no matter what that product is, it has a shelf life. Like, that's why new things come out. That's why Apple designs a new iPhone every so often, because if things didn't have a shelf life, they would people would never need to buy new stuff. That's just what it is, and that's exactly what happens. That's what happened with Warhammer Fantasy. It's what's happened with Guild Ball. The people that play it don't buy new stuff because A, there's either nothing new to buy anymore, or 2, it's difficult for the company to design new stuff because it's already so kind of wide. It's already become quite sort of bloated, and it's difficult to bring something new to that game that doesn't either break it or doesn't just give you more of the same. Jimmy says, don't most sports types have a shelf life? You can only do so much in a sports game. Once you have the rules of the game, that's it. Otherwise, it isn't sports. To an extent, mate, but then I think X-Wing is a prime example. It's not a sports game, and basically that has a shelf life. I think if Underworlds didn't keep rostering out cards, you'd have the same issue. I don't think it's necessarily linked to sports. I think it's linked to being intentionally competitive. Vocal Bites, I always wanted to win at Gen Con Open and get my character written in a Battletech novel. Is that what they do if you win, mate? Is it? Vocal says a sports game is a natural for a seasonal update, new records and old records broken, new Hall of Fame. I don't think Guild Ball really leans into the sports game in the same way Blood Bowl doesn't really lean into a sports game. It's just a game that happens to be based around a sport, if you like. Pomsey's saying there, I don't like to bring up video games again, but how many Call of Duties has there been? Hundreds. It hasn't got a shelf life, has it? It keeps getting refreshed, mate. That's the whole point. They keep replacing it with a new one. That's more to do with selling stuff. That's more to do with making money. But every other game has a shelf life. That's why you have a second edition, a third edition, a fourth edition, a fifth edition. They revamp the game, they change it, they mix things up, they change rules, they improve rules, they bring out new models, they might get rid of old models and stuff. That's how you keep it going. They still have a shelf life. That's what I said when I had my big long sort of pitch before. There's two things you can do. You either rejuvenate the game and you refresh it and you give it a second life, or you kill it off. And what Steamforged is saying is that when they asked their community, the community didn't want them to refresh it. They didn't want a second edition. They didn't want something that was different from what they had. That's what they're saying. So yeah, every game still has a shelf life. It's just that some games get refreshed and some games basically just sit and do nothing. Scott says, I want to field everything to feel how it plays on the table and have some fun if I win. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. Yeah, that's it. That's my attitude, mate, to be fair. Dan says, me and you played at Warcry at Warhammer World. We did, mate. Thank you very much. He says, we had a really good competitive game, but we did it in a fun manner and had a laugh doing it the perfect way. Good to see you doing well, mate. Thank you very much, Dan. Nice to see you again as well. And yeah, I agree. But I think the difference was and I think that whole tournament was a relatively kind of, it was generally people who were of a like mind. We enjoyed the game. It was new. There was no kind of sort of veterans who'd been playing for 10 years and knew the game inside out and had metagamed the life out of it. I think that has a lot to play into it. I think Warcry itself isn't the most balanced and competitive game, which then maybe doesn't attract that mega competitive gamer. So I think there's a lot to be said about that, mate. But I would agree. I had, was it 3 or 4? I had four really good games that day. One game I got my arse handed to me by the eventual winner, and there was definitely those moments of, God, I didn't have a clue that I did that. But that wasn't because the game was competitive. The guy I played knew what he was doing, basically. That was the difference, I think. And I didn't. I was there for fun. Where's that? Just jumped off my screen there a little bit. Let's have a look. I'll just dive in. Luke Pryor says, I enjoy too much putting out lists or decks that fit a theme or narrative I have created. Invariably on or competitive, but as long as they don't die on their arse, I'm happy. And I think in that respect, mate, we're probably similar. That we probably fit into that kind of like middle tier of people that I enjoy going to events. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy playing more games. I don't play as often as I would like to. I love to go to an event because I know for a fact I'm going to get 5 or 6 games of something in. But then I probably don't play the games that are mega competitive. I intentionally don't play things like I used to play Star Wars Destiny, the card game, and every time I played at an event, I enjoyed it, and actually I was pretty good at it. I won my first tournament. I came second in my second tournament. I was all right at the game, but it was mega competitive. Like, we might have a laugh and stuff between the games, but when you were playing the games, it was really mega focused. And some people weren't happy the fact that I basically won the first tournament. I had a starter set. I basically had 2 starter sets that I put together to build a list, and I won the tournament. And people were quite nasty about the fact that it just shows that the starter sets are broken because he's just kind of come in first time and won this bloody tournament. And it's like, I've got access to the same cards you've got access to. Like, it's not my fault kind of thing. And I think that is derivative of some bad-tempered players, but it's also derivative maybe of a competitive game that maybe isn't as balanced as it needs to be, or basically maybe attract people that are just maybe bad losers. I don't know. Scott said he's given up on his death watch now. He's turned into competitive drinking with me and the wife and her friend. Pomsey's saying there's bend in my mind. So we're saying competitive games are destined to die. Their competitive games have a shelf life. At the end of that shelf life, the company can do two things. They can revamp the game and bring out a second edition, or they can kill it off. And what's happened here is that Steamforged have killed it off because the community didn't want a second edition. What happens elsewhere is they don't ask the community. Fantasy Flight Games didn't ask X-Wing players if they wanted a second edition. They just knew if they wanted to keep selling minis and wanted to keep selling X-Wings and all the other flight ships, they had to have a second edition. Like, Infinity is coming up to N4 now. It's the 4th edition of it. Some games get into a cycle where players just expect a revamp now. And I think that's the difference. But all competitive games will have a point where if you need to balance them to the far end of a fort, the bigger the amount of models that are in that game gets, it's an impossible task to either balance everything or bring something new that adds something to the game, unless you're going to start adding new rules. So when these models come in, they have completely new rules that basically shift the game in a different direction. That tends to be what kind of happens. James says, I was talking to a person who played 40k tournament and just gave up after the first 3 turns. What's the point in that? All that's set up enough for me. Yeah. Beauty saying, I suppose it'll happen to 40k at some point. 40k obviously has its resets, so it has its new editions that come out. But I do think GW are in a little bit of a... They're in a situation where I think if they keep up the release schedule, people will get burned out on it. It's the casual player that will get burned out on it, I think. And I think at some point they will see sales suffer if they're not careful on the constant kind of release of stuff. I know you don't have to have everything, but there's a big portion of that that community that do feel that way. Excuse me. Superpunker Man says, I'm glad there are only 4 players at the game store that's super competitive and only one is a sore loser and a sore winner. Being a sore loser and a sore winner is a personality trait. There's no excuse for that. But being a competitive player doesn't make somebody a bad person. Ian says, I don't get why Guild Ball will be totally cut. Why not just announce a slowdown, sprinkle a few models over 5 years and then do a total relaunch with new rules? All players will just be happy to play again. I think the problem is, mate, is that... that's your opinion. I'm assuming Steamforged have done a bit more. I mean, they haven't done this on a whim. They've obviously seen sales have dropped to a point where it's just not worth the effort and the time and the money. It's obviously becoming harder to try and balance new factions because of the size of the game now. The time and effort it takes to put into that and not wreck the game by putting them in unbalanced. And then the amount of stuff they're going to sell, it obviously mustn't be worth it, mate. That's all I can say. And reading between the lines on their statement, that's what I think they've done. So I get from a player's point of view, you might say, well, I'd be quite happy if they just did a new faction every year or whatever. The problem is that takes resources, and if that resources sculpting minis and designing rules and designing artwork and cards, if those resources can be used elsewhere on a new game to make more money, that's the right business decision. Like it might not be right for you as a hobbyist. It might not be right for me as a gamer, for example. But as a business, they have to make those decisions. That's just what happens. Any business that doesn't make those decisions probably won't be in business for very long. Glenn says, the last Call of Duty I played was COD 2, and I mean the original 2. I loved COD 2, mate. What was that one? I've just... Football just saying he's just seen sort of a team of nuns 30 years ago. Bobby's saying there, I think what Andy's saying is competitive games struggle to recruit new players and offer less to casual players, so have a smaller shelf life. I think, I'm not 100% sure myself. Yeah, that's pretty much it, mate. Is that the longer a game goes on, the wider the gap is between new players and experienced veteran players, and the more models there are in a game, the more difficult it is to balance that game, and the more difficult it is to bring new players in because it's a negative experience to come in to that really established basically a really established game. Jim says, I think the Guild Ball shutdown would have been easier if they said no more minis, but we'll sponsor a few tournaments until competition died down. I'm not saying that they won't do that, mate. To be fair, I mean they're not killing off Guild Ball as an IP. Guild Ball will come back, I would imagine, at some point under a different guise. It might be a completely different game. It might be an RPG, whatever it is. It might be a board game, for example. It might come back as something like Blitzball, for example. But essentially, what they're saying is that they're not going to sell any more minis. They're not selling any more minis for the game, really. Roxanne says, "Is this more prevalent online than in real life? I'd never heard of min-maxing under overpowered tiers for armies list until I first went online." I think, Roxanne, hello, by the way, I think it depends upon who you play with. I used to play in a gaming group where that was quite prevalent before the days of the internet and stuff like that, before I kind of was kind of seeing stuff online. I think there were people who did min-max. It was just that they did it in a more isolated way, and they didn't list build based upon what they'd read online. I think the difference is now is people go online to try and get more information. So I think it's maybe more prevalent now and more talked about now, but depends upon what your gaming group was like. You probably either had those players or you didn't have those players. Pomsy said, I get that, mate, but my view is that if it comes down to how fun the game is, the players and the marketing equals success. It's not that simple, mate. If the game, like Guild Ball is a fun game, but it's difficult for new players who want to play in the established kind of community because it's difficult to get a foothold. You will get stomped pretty much all of the time until you play enough games or somebody teaches you how to get over that and teaches you what you're doing wrong. If you just want to play like with a buddy in the house with a pint of beer and like a pizza, the game will still be fun. You'll play it in a completely different way. Like if you play 20 games at home and you think, I know how to play this, and then go to a tournament, you'll get smashed because you've essentially learned how to play the game in one particular way. But it doesn't mean it's less fun. It just means players at competitive levels play on a completely different kind of level. That's what I'm trying to say. Walter Black says, I do enjoy game systems that update all their army rules at the same time, like Wild West Exodus and Kings of War. Yeah, I think when they pick away at them, it's really difficult to kind of keep up with stuff. I think like a mass update of everything at once, as long as it's not too frequent, I think it's definitely the right way to do it. Nurglin says, good evening, guys. Just dropped in, popping a like on the stream and saying hi. Thank you very much, Nurglin. Lee Burns, good evening, mate. How are you doing? Dave Doggy says, Connect 4 by MB, never need an expansion. We're getting back to chess again now, aren't we? Pomsy saying, I get you. What I don't understand is why they followed the community. Screw the community, make money, you're a business. You're only a business when you have customers. And if all of your customers desert you because you ask them and then you do the complete opposite of what they say, you won't have any customers. And I think that was the problem. It was just easier for them to walk away than to try and put time and money into something that was potentially flogging a dead horse, mate. Blizzards are saying, yeah, FFG screwed a lot of their player base with X-Wing 2.0. I completely agree, mate. They're trying to kind of fight through it, I think. It's definitely not as it's not as popular as it was. But yeah, they definitely screwed a lot of people over. I would agree. Football Bite says, I'm 60 years old, fat and ugly. My miniatures event is Vietnam War. I don't attract new people. I got to go out and recruit them. I'm not meeting a lot of players. Yeah, and that's it, mate. Luke says, balance to the far end of a fart. That's a new one on me. I've never heard that, far end of a fart. It just means when you're going to the extremes of something, the far end of a fart. Christian, thank you for sharing the Amazon link there, mate. Much appreciated. Peter says, I really don't get all of this. If you love a game, why would you mind changing it up? Because, mate, you're obviously not a very competitive, high-end competitive player when it comes to that, right? And if you love that game exactly how it is, why would you want it to change? Why do you think you see online so many people ranting and raving when GW changed stuff? The people that are at the extreme level have spent a lot of time and lots of play hours to get good at that game. They don't want it to change. And this is the problem with very competitive games. That's the point, really, mate. Luke says, I can't stand a sore loser, but I really can't stand a sore winner. I know what you mean, mate. Super Punker Man says, I would like GW going back to updates every 5 to 7 years. Yeah, it doesn't make money, mate. That's why they won't do it. Flying Mama says, definitely had a competitive game of Warcry with me. You definitely did. Ruth, our game is still one of the highlights ever of all the games, of every game I've ever played. Lee now says, don't know if you touched on it, came in late, but do you think Kill Team is still competitively viable or the meta end game has been reached? I think that the community is keeping Kill Team competitive. I think they will kind of self-regulate that game. But I think what's going to be interesting is if GW do something to relaunch Kill Team, like a Kill Team 2.0, because the Kill Team was never really competitively balanced from the off, really. So the community have developed their own meta for that game. The community have developed their own comp packs for that now. So I think it depends on the community themselves, really. I don't think GW are that interested in trying to balance it, if I'm honest. And the other side of it is they don't really add new stuff to the game, which means they don't have to rebalance it very often. Like they have the Kill Team annual end of last year. If I remember right, I don't think there was any points changes in it, if I remember right. So I think Games Workshop, they tend not to go for that mega competitive stuff. They just want people to have a fun game, basically. And then what happens is the people that want to play competitively change the game or change the rules up to suit a more balanced need. Silencer says, let's say this. Part 1, I get the business side. You have to stay afloat. But Guild Ball was terribly mismanaged and bungled. Guild Ball had constant problems with miniature supply. The miniature quality sucked. I don't disagree with that, mate. If they've had problems with supply and everything else, then potentially that might play into one of the reasons why they've canned it. Maybe it's just not worth the hassle anymore. Maybe for whatever reason, it's too expensive or too much work to go back and try and fix all of those things. So just cut your ties. They've already got God tier coming through now, which they seem to have gotten a hold of the plastics for their minis, and maybe they're in a better place with it. So I can't profess to know all of the business decisions that go behind this. I can only guess at some of the stuff from my own experience. I can read between the lines of what they've written, but they've been quite open about it. I just think that, I mean, there was one of the comments, I think, I don't know if I highlighted it here. Where was it? There was a comment about launching new captains last year gave us the best view on the size of the community and helped shape our understanding of how best to move forward. It obviously just, for whatever reason, they decided that sales are just not where they needed to be. So, I was taught flight suit attitude by the great game designer John Hill. Strut and crow like a rooster, mentally dominating budget. Yeah, it doesn't always go down very well, mate. Maybe that's why you're not finding many players. David says, I find I'm a competitive person, not toxically so, but I prefer to play in friendly, casual games with friends. Where does that put me? You're probably just somewhere in the middle, mate. Like, I can be competitive. I'm quite competitive in life. I want to do well at things. I don't want to kind of fail at things. I want to do the best I can, but when it comes to games, I want to have fun. Fun is more important than winning. I'd rather, in an ideal situation, I have a really fun game and win. That's where I'd love to be. But winning isn't the most important. You sit somewhere in the middle, mate, much like me probably. Silencer says, part 2, they did not have bloody idea what to do with the rules. Then they switched over to Resident. They supposedly cut the cost, but the miniatures were £5 more expensive. And then part 3, in the end, I just jumped off my screen there, they literally spit and chat all over the community as they did not have an idea with the game. The game will survive like Battlefleet, Gothic or Mordheim. It will be in better shape. If it's in better shape, mate, then great. That's brilliant for the community. Like I say, I can't speak on behalf of the company. I've got an opinion on what I've read and what I know. But I wasn't part of the community to know every little kind of sort of both sides of everything, really. It's less about Guild Ball, what I'm talking about tonight. I'm using Guild Ball as the example that basically has inspired what I'm talking about tonight. But I think this is relevant for any game. Any game that is designed with competitive play in mind will reach a point where it's at its point, and it either develops into a second edition,
or basically it burns itself out. Like that's I think that's just that's just how it is. I would love to speak. If you're a game designer, anybody watching this back in afterwards or anything like that, or you know games designers to speak to, ask them: Do you think competitive games have a shelf life? Is there a point where it just basically there's too much going on to try and balance it out? Vopal says, when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons back in '75, we improvised. The plot was merely a suggestion. We knew nothing about the rules. Yeah, but then you don't necessarily get Dungeons and Dragons competitively, I don't think. Pomsy said, I don't mean screw the community, but GW don't ask people if they should bring out a new Underworlds, do they? They just do it. No, and I think there's an element of inexperience there, I think, from Steamforged. I think that basically they grew big with Guild Ball on the back of a really strong community, and I think they've probably felt it. They probably felt that they should ask the community and get more advice and kind of get more feedback, really. I think that was where it started. But I think you're right. As a business, they should have just made a business decision. Whatever's best for the company is what they should have done. And then what will be, basically. What will happen is what will happen. Like you say, before, Fantasy Flight Games didn't ask X-Wing players if they wanted a second edition. It was just generally felt, I think, that the game had got to a point that it needed a refresh. And I don't know personally if Guild Ball players felt the same way. I don't know that. Vopal saying these modern generation of players want to follow the text of those 40-year-old modules like law. They can't stand improvising. I think, again, that depends on the player, mate. And I think sometimes players just want to play a game. Like, I don't necessarily want to write my own rules. I want to just play the game as it's written. Somebody else is being paid to design a game. I just kind of want to play the game that's being written, really. But when you start to kind of rules lawyer things, I think that's when it becomes about being competitive. When you're trying to kind of get into the, rather than just saying it seems like it should be this. That's what I think that's what they mean. Do you agree? Yeah, right. Let's just play it that way. Then that's kind of how I play my games. But I do see people really kind of like arguing the fine point of it, and that's because they want to win. That's because it's important to them to get it right. Pomsy saying, yeah, if you don't make dollars, it does make sense. I agree, mate. James is saying, feel like it would be literally impossible to balance 40k because there's so much stuff. And that is exactly my point, mate. That is the point. If you have a game where it is intentionally set out to be as balanced as possible, you'll reach a point of critical mass where anything more you put into that game affects the balance, and it stops it being as finely weighted, if you like. And that's kind of where Guild Ball seems to have gotten to. It's where X-Wing got to. It's where War Machine got to. A lot of these competitive games get to that point. 40k is not designed to be finitely balanced. It's not meant to be balanced to the far end of a far, as I said before. It's designed to be a fun game, and be as balanced as it can be with all of the things that's available. However, you just got to look at the 40k community to see how much people kind of talk about Tau's overpowered or Ultramarines have got everything, all that kind of stuff, just to see kind of how it's not balanced. Nobody would tell you 40k is perfectly balanced, and if they did, they're lying. Super Pokemon says that's when 40k 7th edition launched. The army indexes were so awesome and feel like they could have kept going, and the only reason to release individual codexes to have the fluff. 40k was 8th edition, mate, when they launched the indexes, and that was really just to tie them over, because basically the old 7th edition codexes didn't work with the new rules. The move from 7th edition to 8th edition was a huge jump in the rules themselves. From 8th edition to 9th edition now, it's not a huge jump. It's a tinkering of the rules, basically. And the codexes from 8th edition will work until they basically revamp them and to make more money, basically, and keep things moving. Nurglin says, I think Kill Team was a good stepping stone for people to get into the hobby. Small groups of models, all plastic and easy to convert. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, mate. It's not the most simple of rule sets, but I don't disagree. Peter says, but if you spend so many hours to get good at the game as it is, that means you are up for the challenge to relearn when the game changes. You might feel like that, mate. Some people don't like change. If you get really, really good at something, Why would you want it to change? If you've been playing something forever and you're finishing second at every tournament you go to, and you're so close to kind of getting that podium, the last thing you want is for the game to change and have to relearn it all. Like, this is the point. People spend a lot of money on games, especially if you're a kind of competitive edge. They're constantly buying new stuff as the meta changes. They're constantly sort of switching things up. They're getting as many games as possible as they're in. They're traveling to events. They're going to tournaments. The last thing they want is to have to relearn the game again. And that tends to be the point where people just go, I've had it. If I'm going to relearn it, I might as well go and relearn a completely different game. That's in reality, that's what happens, mate. Matthew Wilson says, Underworld's really upset me. I have a lot of old stuff and promo stuff. I can't even sell it. Yeah. Silencer says, what you mentioned, I do agree. You can't design a game as a competitive game from the get-go, or the competitive will devour you. Yeah, and that's kind of exactly what I'm talking about tonight. I'm not talking about the players themselves. I'm saying if you set out to design a competitive game, there's a point where basically the game is no longer yours. The way people play that game will shape the future of that game. If people find stuff that you didn't intentionally put in there, you then have to change the game. You have to change the meta to kind of redirect it in a different way. And at that point, you are playing catch up. You're not shaping the game anymore. The game is shaping your development. That's different, but it happens with all competitive games. Pomsy said, not only that, but as a company, you should have love or faith in your game, surely. They obviously didn't have that. I disagree, mate. Like, you can love something, but just, they're a business. It needs to make money. If it's not making money, it doesn't matter how much you love it. Your business won't survive. Just because you have, like, I can't believe for 1 second that the two creators of this game don't love that game. That they haven't poured, like, it's changed their lives. They now get to own a games company for a living because of the success of Guild Ball, because they did something they loved, and they probably put their mortgages on the line. They probably risked a lot of things to get that off the ground. I can't believe they've just turned their back on it willingly. I think they've probably got investors in that business now. They've got, like, other shareholders. They've got other sort of board members who are really kind of keeping them on the line of, this is a business. It doesn't make business sense to continue with this game anymore. We need to ditch it. I don't know that for a fact, but that's the impression I get. I don't think for 1 second that they've basically just willingly, like, just ditched a game that they created. I think this has probably been like a hard decision for them. I'm not saying it's the right decision, but I bet it wasn't easy. James says, FAQs are the worst as a casual player. I spend half the time flipping through books as it is. I usually ignore the FAQ rules unless they're really beneficial for me. And I think if you're playing casual games with your mate, almost FAQs are irrelevant, mate. Like, back in the day, we didn't get FAQs because before the internet and stuff, people never, like, fed back, like, how they played. People didn't know they were playing rules wrong because nobody ever told them. They didn't see a battle report online to go, oh shit, I've been playing that wrong for ages. People didn't see any of that stuff, so they just went about playing their games. They might have went to a tournament and somebody said, oh, by the way, you're playing that wrong, and that might have kind of realigned them a little bit. But generally, people didn't chat about the game. Like, people didn't send letters around to each other, kind of thing. Like, before the internet, they just played within their communities, and they basically played the rules the way everybody accepted that's how the rule works. These days, you've got access to kind of millions of people to kind of to debate these things, and what does it really mean? And you have a way to contact the game designer now. You have a way to contact the game developer. So things have changed, and that's one of the reasons now that we see so many FAQs and so many erratas and everything else. Bobby Clark says, is it less about competitive player style killing games, more poor business decisions, or ability to adapt the games company, you think? No, I don't think so, mate. It's not about competitive. It's not about competitive player styles killing the games. It's nothing to do with the players. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter kind of whether it's a huge game or whether it's a small game. If it's a competitive game and it's designed to be balanced, it will reach a point where it becomes almost impossible to balance it as it is. So you need to kind of reset and redo the rules with more factions in mind. Unless you've designed the game from day one with 20 expansions over the next 5 or 6 years, you're gonna find a point where you're trying to fit something in to an existing rule set, and you go, well, if I put that in, it'll combine with this, it'll break that. The more moving parts, the harder it is to get it all balanced and working. And so basically, it might be poor business decisions, it might be an inability to adapt the game, but that's not necessarily the designer's fault. That's just because the game's got out of control. It's just too big anymore. It's just too big now. It's like collecting stuff basically. Like how can I liken it really? I can't even think of like an analogy at the minute. But the more, if you collect board games, the more board games you've got, the less you'll play, kind of thing. It becomes difficult to kind of like to get to them all. If you have 2 games, you'll probably just play them equally. Do you know what I mean? And that's what rules end up being like for games which have more and more and more models. If I do something to this new model, what's the effect across all of those different factions? If I've got 2 factions and I bring a new faction out, what's the effect on them 2 factions? It doesn't take long to work out the combinations that will affect it. If I bring out this new faction, and I think there's 17 factions out now for Guild Ball. I think there's less than that. I think there's only about 12 or 14 out for Blood Bowl as a comparison. Official ones from Games Workshop anyway. Simon Davis says, I totally agree. You see there's a lot in hyper-competitive games, video games. They update or they stop making them. Yeah, exactly, mate. Street Fighter 4 or 5 is kind of an example. People didn't want a new game, but it was stagnant. Yeah, it's exactly it, mate. Night Scott, thank you very much for coming in, mate. Vopal says, at one point I had a 500 plus Battletech army, became overwhelming. Lee Burns says, do you not think, Andy, that real competitive players actually like change? Change gives really good players the opportunity to find the new hotness first. It's not change that they like, mate. What they like is updates and new stuff. They love the game as the game is, but they want new stuff. They want new stuff to keep the meta changing so the game doesn't become stale. That's different from wanting the basic rules of the game to change with an update to a second edition. That's where I'll kind of draw the differences. Competitive players want to see the meta changing. They want a new challenge to play against different armies, to pick a new army, to combat that stuff that's a little bit broken. It's like when you're in a competitive environment, if the game isn't that balanced, you either embrace the top tier list and play it, or you build your list to combat the top tier list. And that's why they keep changing up the meta. That's why new things come in. That's why points changes happen. So it's different from people wanting the game to grow and to adapt over time, but with the same basic rule set, rather than move to a second edition and completely kind of like rewrite some of the rules, if you like. That's kind of where I'm getting at. Let's have a look. Andrew Fairbanks says, wait, what happened to Underworlds? Underworlds basically, mate, what they do is any cards, or majority of the cards, I should say, from Season 1, the Shadespire season, can't be used in competitive play. And when the new 4th season comes out, any cards from Night Vault, or certain cards from Night Vault, won't be available to be used in competitive play. They've essentially set up the model now so that cards from the current season and the ones before are the only ones you can use. This is exactly how you balance a competitive game, because you limit the overall impact. If you've got 4 seasons worth of cards, you can't possibly fix every broken combination in that. If you bring it down to a smaller size and you're constantly working on that smaller size, then you can balance it. Where are we at? Peter says, but it's a business, it has to make money. But if people play and don't buy anything new, why listen to them about changing the game up? I guess they were just kind of asking like what people wanted. I guess they were just trying to understand it. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do. Six in the Head says, is that not a contradiction? You said Call of Duty survives because it changes, but tabletop games don't. No, tabletop games do change, mate. This is when they release a second edition. This is when they release a third edition. This is exactly what happens. They reach the end of they reach a point in time where it's basically, there's nothing they can really add to it without changing the game. So they change the game and they bring out a second edition. What Guild Ball have decided to do is ask their community, shall we have a second edition and change it up? And the community have said no, and I'm paraphrasing there. So they've said, right, well, in that case, it's not making any money, so let's just kill it off. So it's not a contradiction, it's just that they've taken it. There's only two things you can do. You can either rejuvenate the game with new rules, try and rebalance it with the rules that are in the game and stuff, and bring out a new edition, or you can kill it off. Those are only really the two things. Or you can keep going and it becomes unbalanced and unmanageable. But that's even worse. Again, that will kill your game without you wanting to be killed. No, and I agree, Peter, you're saying there about why listen to them about changing the game up. I think the problem is they probably made a mistake. They shouldn't have necessarily asked the community what they wanted. But once they had, you couldn't exactly just go against them. Do you know what I mean? Because then at that point, it's like, well, why did you ask us? You just did what you wanted anyway. James Bray says, before the internet, mate, how old? I'm not talking that long ago, mate. I'm talking about before big sort of gaming groups, like, you got like message boards and stuff, didn't you? And you got like forums and stuff, but it wasn't like instantaneous the way like Facebook is now. It wasn't in a mobile phone in your hand. You were sitting on a computer at home. Like, people didn't really have laptops and they didn't have tablets. They didn't have like smartphones and stuff. That's what I mean. I figure my mini armies ever fights a Warhammer 40k army, I'll lead with B-52. I've got no idea what you're talking about, mate. Ian says, my board game group misread the rules to Spice Road, but once we were corrected, we found we liked our way better. That happens quite a lot, mate, more than you'd expect. Lord Maiden says, I didn't hear if BlackJack Legacy read about my Guild Ball stuff. I don't know if I did, mate. The stream was jumping around. There was loads of chat tonight, so I just kind of kept going, mate. So I apologise if I've missed anything. Mark, see you later, mate. Thank you for coming in, mate. Walter says 26 teams for Blood Bowl, and they're adding more, I think. If you look on the Blood Bowl website, mate, there's only 12, I think. And if you look on the GW site for what they sell, I think there's only about 16, mate. So that was where I got the information from. There might be 26 in like kind of like in the NAF documents and stuff like that. But I think from the stuff that they sell now, I think it's less. Glenn says, what are you hoping to see in GW preview next Saturday? I'm hoping we see a bit more for Warcry, mate. The other stuff I can kind of take or leave. It's not really stuff I'm interested in. But I'm hoping we see release dates for this, not the Spire Tyrants, is it? Scions of the Flame, I think it is. I hope we see a release date for that. I hope we see a release date for the, what's it called? The Coronite, whatever it is, those kind of like elf assassin things. I hope we see a release date for that. I can imagine they're probably going to tell us there's a new Tome of Champions coming at the end of the year as well. I'd be amazed if we get anything more than that, mate, but I would like to see that. James says, I wonder if a game where each side always has the same rules, like sports, but they just release different themes and styles, can become competitive. I wonder if they had a game where each side always had the same rules. But they have that now, mate, really. They kind of have that now, really, in miniature games. Even Guild Ball has that, really, because the core rules are the core rules. Blood Bowl has that. The core rules are the core rules, and the themes and styles just come from what sort of additional stuff that they give to those things. If you don't give them additional rules, you're essentially just giving them like slight variations. You make one a little bit stronger and one a bit weaker, and that one a bit faster and the other one a bit slower. You've only got so many basically like moving parts that you can adjust. So what you do is you come back to exactly what I've been talking about. You get to a point where you reach critical mass and there's nowhere left to go in the design space, especially when your game revolves around a D6. Like, there's not a lot of space. There's not much you can kind of do with the rules at that point. Where was that one? Paulie P says, love the board game metaphor. I'm a bit guilty of that. Need more Kallax. I know that feeling as well, mate. Superpunk and Man says, one of the games I play as an RPG, but I do agree with it is even not always fair, but it can be balanced. Tony says, the Captain thing is a red herring. They sold out. It wasn't down to no one buying them. Maybe what they meant, mate, when they sold out was they got maybe pre-orders from stores, and maybe that gave them an idea of how big the audience was. I don't know, mate. I can't imagine they would say that if there was nothing to base that upon, for example. Maybe stores had kind of given up on supporting it because basically they couldn't get any stock and stuff. I'm sure that was probably part of it. So if stores weren't putting orders in for it, and they didn't produce many for it, and then it basically sold out, it probably didn't give them the kind of a true picture, if you like, then. Peter says, they ask what people wanted. Making new stuff is not always about making what people want. It's about making what the people never knew they wanted. It's not from a movie, mate. I think it's a quote by Steve Jobs, basically, from Apple. But I get what you're saying. But if you read the document, and again, we're focusing on Guild Ball. This is not necessarily about Guild Ball. I'm using that as an example of a game that's reached its kind of end of life. But it is relevant to all games, especially competitive ones. But all I would say is it takes a lot of time and money to develop a game. It takes a lot of time and money to redevelop a game. And if the main part of your community is not behind you from the start, maybe it's not worth it. And what I say is when they're not behind them is the feedback they got was that people didn't want it to change. So then, for me personally, you don't ask them. If you go with your gut, you go with your own business decision, and you succeed or fail on your own decisions. I think that was one of their failings. They shouldn't have asked the community. They should have just done what they thought was right. Probably saying, I don't understand why they did that. It's like a band asking fans, shall we bring out a new album? I don't think that's the same thing, mate. But I wouldn't have done it personally. I don't kind of ask people what videos I should make, because what you do is you get a minority of people asking for something. Like if I get 3 people asking for some obscure game, it doesn't mean anybody more than those 3 people are going to watch it. And that's the same thing that happens when you start asking people basically about what they should do about the rules, is that it's only the vocal people that you hear from, and it doesn't necessarily mean what they're saying is right necessarily. Although, to be fair, a lot of companies do focus groups and stuff like that. Iron says, do you do Subscribe Star as well as Patreon? Not a big fan of Patreon. I don't even know what Subscribe Star is, mate, to be fair. I only use Patreon because it is... It doesn't take as big a fee from me as people like YouTube and stuff does, and it's easy to control kind of rewards to people. It's easy for me to kind of provide like the bonus stuff that my Patreon gives me. I don't even know what Subscribe Star is, and I think all it would do is it would end up being more stuff to manage. I understand a lot of people not everybody likes Patreon for whatever reason. I'm not fully aware of the reasons behind why people don't like it, but for me, for what I do, for the size I am, it's the most kind of user-friendly and usable platform. Busey saying there, any 40k stuff coming up on the Hobby Hangout? There will be eventually, mate, but the problem I've got at the minute is the 40k stuff is, for me personally, it's my hobby stuff, really, if you like. And I've got so much stuff that's been kind of sent for reviews and things that I've been using the Hobby Hangouts to kind of catch up on that. It's kind of work time, really. So I've been catching up on that stuff. But yeah, it will do eventually once I've kind of caught up on the other stuff. Lord Maiden says, it's okay. What should have been a great night with you painting and my cracked bases turned bad after something bad happened. It'll be okay, but it ruined the night. Oh, sorry, Matt. Well, I hope everything's okay, buddy. Lord Min saying, thanks, guys. I hope so too, but I'm keeping an eye to see if it gets worse. I'm not. I hope I haven't missed it, mate. But whatever it was, mate, I hope it was okay, buddy. Tony says, SFG basically started making some models only available from them, which upset friendly local gaming stores. So perhaps you're right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff in that, mate, as well. I think basically they're like the other companies do the same thing. The rise of Kickstarter now is almost kind of shortcutting a lot of those friendly local gaming stores now. Palmsy being a conspiracy theorist there. Simon Davis says, your Ultramarines look great, mate. Any plans to do a hobby hangout for your Indomitus stuff? Yeah, kind of what I've just said before there, mate, is I will do it. They're for me. I'm not doing them to kind of make lots of content about 40k. They're kind of my personal hobby stuff. I've built the stuff. I've not even managed to get time to prime them. I've just got too much work to do, mate, to be fair. Too much other stuff that's taking up my time at the minute, and I'm behind on that. So I'll get there at some point. But yeah, so I will at some point. James says you should put the video topics up for a vote on Facebook, mate. I wonder what game you talk about every week. Do you know what, mate? There's a prime example about what happens when you ask the community. You don't always get a true picture. James Bray says next someone will be asking Andy to set up an OnlyFans. Yeah, I think the craft beer's kicked in. Peterson, yes, Steve Jobs, I knew it was from somewhere, good memory. Yeah, working in product development, mate, I learned a lot from what Steve Jobs said. Noxie says DC Comics went the route of listening to what 3 people want instead of the masses. Yeah, it's sometimes it's the worst thing you can do is ask people. You have to kind of live and die by your own decisions, and it's good to get a read for what people want. But like for example, for my video stuff, I can tell what people enjoy watching, and I can tell what people don't enjoy watching that I make from views. I can see how long they stay tuned in to watch it. I can see how many views they get. I can see how many likes they get, how many dislikes they get, all that kind of stuff. But as soon as I ask people what they want, you will get a very narrow kind of subset of stuff. And then if you don't do what they ask, some people take that quite personally. So it's sometimes better just to go with your gut feeling, and sometimes you'll get it wrong, and that's just kind of live and learn. But then you haven't asked somebody what they want and then appeared to have ignored them or done the complete opposite. That's when things, I think, sometimes get into a sticky situation. Lord Maiden says, thanks, I'm glad I can end the night of how I wanted to, seeing and listening to the Northern Monkey. Thank you, fella, thank you. Super Punker Man says, I think we need to get focused on getting Andy dancing. Oh, subscribe. You get me to 9,000 subscribers, we'll have another dance. I think I'm at about 8.4 or something like that. When we hit 9, we'll have another little dance. Walter Black says GW has an interesting way of their releases. They just release what they want and release and don't really care about what the community's asking for. Yeah, I think it's much easier to do that when you've got a huge community. When you've only got a small community, one misstep can really come back and kind of backfire on you. The other side of it is, Walter's saying they buy it anyway. The other side of it is that the quality of their stuff is definitely far superior to most companies anyway. Super says, if it isn't so, it should be. Daisy said, yeah, look at Spartan Games. Yeah, Spartan Games. That's another one. They basically kind of like took a chance on with a Halo license. It all kind of backfired for them. And I think some of what happened there was they got into some production issues, so they invested a lot of money to bring production in-house. I can imagine they must have been tied in with the license and probably couldn't get out of it at that point. So they decided to invest money in bringing production in-house, and I think the whole thing kind of come crashing down, I think. And Peter says the answer seems to be to produce games for the competitive players and accept there will be a limited life for the game. Or maybe the answer is that accept that there's a limited life and that at some point you will have to do something about it, and don't ask the community. That might be the answer, mate. And then produce games for casual, less competitive players and support them as long as there's new ideas. Yeah. Simon Davis is talking of GW, the new Necromunda stuff looks really cool. I might get some of the Slave Ogryn, and I don't even play Necromunda. I saw them today, mate, like for the first time, like in a better image. And they're pretty cool. I've got no idea when I would ever use them in anything else, though. James says, 2 hours in and still on topic. Good work, mate. Yeah, my throat is definitely drying out now, though, mate, that's for sure. Pomsy says, I'm saying what serious business would act like that unless they really wanted to kill the games themselves? I think the whole point is, mate, they always intended that the end of this next season would be the end of its cycle. So it was always heading to that point anyway. They've just canned it early. And I think that's probably what's happened. And to be fair, since Guild Ball came out, they've been releasing a lot of other stuff like Resident Evil 2, like Ni no Kuni, like Horizon Zero Dawn's on its way, Resident Evil 3's on its way, Devil May Cry's on its way. They do all the Critical Role stuff. They're probably just seeing that those kind of games make more financial business sense long term, because you kind of make them, you design them, you make them, you sell them, and then you move on to something else. And miniatures games that you have to constantly kind of work on and constantly update might just not be the best thing in their model, basically. That might not be where their future is. So potentially they just decide to cut their losses and get out. I'm guessing at this. I don't know for certain, but I can imagine that's probably where the thinking is. When they've brought people in as kind of directors of the business to advise them on how the best way to run the business is, it wouldn't surprise me if they're basically looking at, well, I can spend 6 months designing and developing a new game that goes to Kickstarter and makes £1.5 million, or I can spend 6 months trying to craft new rules and designing a new team for Guild Ball. Do you know what I mean? So potentially there's something in that. Simon Dave says there was a Halo mini game. There was, mate, and it pretty much died as quickly as it came along, because the company went under. Yeah, Lord made the same about Dark Souls. Peter says still no idea what Ni no Kuni is. It's a video game, mate. So there you go. Dungeons and Doggos stuff was them too. I'm not sure it was them technically, or if they sell it via, and I think the sculptor who works for them, Russ Charles, I think sculpts them, or certainly I think he might be freelance. I'm not sure. I don't think he works directly for Steamforge. So I think there was maybe some agreement with them to basically sell them. H. Lambert says, I think War Machine cause works because it's balanced around its imbalances. I think the problem is, mate, War Machine's probably seen its day. That's the reason why Privateer Press tried a 3rd edition. It didn't really kind of pan out as popular as 2nd edition. It had a lot of problems, and now I think they're kind of investing their future into Warcaster now, mate. Dicey Guy says Guild Ball was at its core meant to be a perfect game and was never meant to be a Magic the Gathering booster pack type of game. Yeah, it was always meant to be perfectly balanced, mate, yeah. Kirill says, as for me, Guild Ball has too much rules on character cards. All their skills and regular changes make it impossible to remember if it's not your main regularly played game. And I think that is another thing that comes down with competitive games. It tends to be most competitive players' most regularly played game, mate. So, yeah. Most Extreme Noob says, if a game that can be fairly competitive is a huge hit, it can live without new stuff. Blood Bowl was dead for ages, but there's plenty of alternate companies making teams. I agree, mate. A game can live on if it's basically in its complete form, as Guild Ball is now. It's probably as balanced as it's ever going to be, or it ever was. And the problem is now, from a Steamforge point of view, they don't make any money out of it. Blood Bowl is a prime example. Games Workshop probably got to the same point where they basically just weren't making any money out of it now, because it had reached its critical mass of everybody that wants to play it, plays it. They've bought everything they want. It's a hugely popular game, but it's not making the money to justify more work on it. And then basically they have a load of time away from it. They realise just how popular it is. It's still around there. It's hugely supported. There's 1,000 people going to international tournaments. Right, let's come back into it again and sell a load of new stuff. So you almost just go back and tread old ground and redo new sculpts and make everything in plastic and all that kind of stuff. So this is what it doesn't kill the game. Because a company stops supporting a game doesn't mean the game will necessarily die. But games do have a shelf life where they get to a point where it doesn't need any more development. It's reached basically the point of where, like I said before about critical mass, it's reached the point where you're kind of going to break the game by keep working on it. You know, when you're painting a miniature and you think, like, it looks pretty good, I feel like I should keep going at it, but I'm going to make it worse, so I need to just stop now. Like when TV series get to a point where you think, this was pretty good. It's had a good run now. It's been on for 10 seasons. It doesn't need another season now. It's definitely seeing the end of it. I think it's that kind of thing. Tony says, have you seen Russ's new project, The Wheelchair Warriors, Disabled D&D? I have, mate. They look fantastic. There was a few people, quite unfairly, I think, complaining about how expensive they were, but bearing in mind they're bigger than standard minis and there is money in there going to charity as well. I don't think it's kind of like I don't think it's too bad. Lambert there saying also to those that say competitive players are jerks or assholes, competitive players are just looking for a different experience. They have fun in that crunch. I completely agree, mate. I said the same thing earlier on. People who are jerks, people who are dicks, are dicks. It doesn't matter whether they're a casual player or whether they're a competitive player. If people are dicks at the table, that's just because of their own personality trait. If people are just competitive players, there is nothing wrong with that. That's the bit of the game they enjoy. And they shouldn't have to dumb down their game to cater to people who don't play as often, for example. And that's where competitive games get into this, they get this kind of bad name that an experienced player crushes a new player. That's just because the game is designed to be about player knowledge, experience, skill level. That's just how it is. It doesn't mean the competitive player is an asshat. It just means that they've put more experience in and they are playing the game the way they like to play it. Busey says this could be a record for stream duration. No, I've had 3 hour streams, made 3.5 hour streams. Most extreme says that I think Guild Ball might live as long as an alternative company makes the teams. I think the problem is it needs a reboot in order to add anything more to the game. It's kind of reached its point where it's difficult to develop it now. You might get I don't think any company would want to pick it up. I don't think anybody would want to buy the game now. It's one of those things where it could sit for 2 or 3 years and then you revisit it with new model technology or something like that and you re-release all of the teams with new sculpts and things. That's potentially where the game could end up in the future, but I think it's too soon basically for somebody just to pick it up and carry it on. Jason said I played the Dark Souls demo game in Gen Con with my brother. We had fun but never been able to find the base box. I think the base box is available pretty much anywhere, mate, to be fair. I've seen it all over the place. I've had a game of it. It's not my type of thing, but I don't think it's difficult to pick up, mate. Peter says, looking at it, every game they make, I look at and say pass. Maybe their stuff is just not my thing. That says a lot about my choice in games. Yeah, maybe it does, mate. I quite liked Guild Ball. I'm not a massively competitive player. It's the kind of game that I would play quite happily, more as a board game. Like the kickoff set I've got, I'm quite happy just to play that as almost a board game experience. I'm busy playing God Tier at the minute to get ready for some reviews coming up soon. But it's essentially it's a fun game. It's just if you want to play a tournament, expect to come up against people who know what they're doing. The difference with God Tier is it's relatively new. People haven't had 5 or 6 years of playing experience on it. That's the difference. Jason saying, surprised we haven't seen a Halo War game by now. We have, mate. We were talking about that before the company went bust. Busey saying they're not selling. Pomsy, sorry, saying are they not selling it? Are they not even selling it anymore? No, they're not selling it anymore, mate. They're basically not selling any more miniatures for it. They've got a sale at the minute where they're selling off stock that they've got. So if people want to kind of round out some of their collections and stuff, they can do. But yeah. Most extreme says, with so many teams making new models for the same teams, you can stretch a long way. I'm not sure if a game can survive just upon alternative sculpts, though, mate. I think it probably can after a while when people are crying out for new stuff. But I think it's probably a bit soon, mate, for that. Tony saying, yeah, knowing when to stop is always tricky. Yeah, definitely, mate. And Pomsy says, dicks are dicks. That's very true. Definitely, mate. Hello, Mark Zielinski. You've come in right at the death, mate, right at the end. And Lee says, night, all good stream, food for thought as ever. Thank you very much, mate. So, folks, with that, it's getting really, really rather warm in here. I'm going to call that a night. I would say if anybody is interested in checking out the Patreon, please do. It's you can get joined from as little as $2 a month. It gets you access to the to the Discord server where there's over 100 people in there having a chat every single day, day and night. There's people from all over the world in there, so there's always somebody up chatting. And at higher tier levels, you get basically extra bonuses as well. I do this full time now, and I basically make my wage, make my income from things like Patreon, from you supporting me through Goblin Gaming, supporting me through Amazon links, from the super chats that you see on the screen, that kind of stuff. So all of that, I don't take any money from the companies I review their products. It keeps me completely independent. It means I can talk about these kind of subjects and say whatever I want, without any kind of fear of somebody cutting me off and not paying my bills next month. So yeah, please do consider subscribing. If you like subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the Patreon. If you like games that are not always the kind of the most I just saw a big drop off there. I thought something had happened. If you're interested in games that are not always kind of flavour of the month, they're not always the most important games, they're not always the biggest games, I cover and talk about every single game that's out there, really. At some point I will anyway. So yeah, if you want to support that for the future, please do consider checking that out. So thank you very much, folks, and I will see you in Wednesday's Hobby Hangout. Thanks for watching my video. I hope that you really enjoyed it. And if you did, why not consider clicking on the suggested video below to see more of the work that I've done. If you'd like to support the long-term sustainability of this channel, why not consider checking out my Patreon, where you can pledge and support from as little as $2 a month. And there is lots of different tiers and bonuses, which will give you access to a private Discord server. It will give you free t-shirts, free mugs, a podcast every month, and a number of other things, including getting your name at the end of every video, like these awesome folks who already support me now.